It was a normal day at his job, which was already drawing to a close. The last concrete mixer had arrived, and nothing foreshadowed the impending danger. The workers were finishing up the last delivery of concrete when he suddenly received a call, and it turned out to be his brother. He asked why he wasn't answering, to which Baek Yi-soo said that it was quite noisy in here, so he didn't hear the ringer. He asked his brother if something had happened to him, but he replied in the negative, saying that he had decided to call him just for the sake of it. He asked if he needed a reason to call his brother, adding that he would like to meet him. Yisu asked if it had to be today because he was a bit busy right now, but his brother insisted. Before he could answer, he heard the voice of one of the workers, who was dissatisfied with how the others had poured the concrete. The pouring was indeed poorly done, and the bodies of the dead floated to the surface, each one wearing a North Korean military uniform. His brother asked again if he was going to come to the meeting tonight, but Yisu was in no hurry to answer. Suddenly, a young guy, who also seemed to be slightly injured, tumbled out of the door behind him. A man came out of the door holding a knife in his hand, with which he had wounded the worker, and hatred was burning in his eyes. It was Lee Yong-chol, a member of North Korea's 525th Task Force, and upon seeing him, Yi-soo ended the conversation. He turned to the guy lying on the ground. It was a newbie who said that he was fine and the wound was not deep, but the commander did not think so. He was the commander of a special unit of the National Intelligence Agency of the Republic of Korea, Baek Ri-fur-soo, who made a total of 12 infiltrations into North Korea. He took off his jacket to stop the bleeding and then was about to subdue Yong-chul, and the other workers began betting on how quickly he could do it. This irritated Yong-chul, and he rushed at the commander with a knife, swinging it right at his throat, but the commander dodged it as if from a childish attack. And then he struck him with an elbow from underneath, hitting him in the jaw, and Yong-chul felt it well, but did not lose consciousness. But as it turned out, this was not the end. So immediately after that, another punch from above followed on his head. This time the Korean lost his footing and fell to the ground, which meant that he had lost consciousness. For Yisu, this fight wasn't even a warm-up. He took his jacket back, saying that it was over. He put on his jacket, saying to patch up the newcomer and tidy up here. He himself had to go to meet his brother. While removing the motionless body of Chul, one of the workers wrinkled his nose, saying that this is why he never talks about the robot. The commander heard this, he thought for a bit, and then said to just tell everyone that he had a dirty job. He had already reached the meeting place and entered inside, heading towards the main entrance. It turned out to be a luxurious establishment, but nothing else was expected from his brother. Upon seeing him, the doorman hurried to inform him that, unfortunately, all the seats had already been booked. But Yisu didn't care. He said this, but it was clear that the doorman didn't really believe it, assessing the man with his eyes. He said that basic etiquette was required in their establishment and then asked him to leave. He was still speaking when an expensively dressed man came out of the door and raised his right hand in greeting, looking at Yisu, who looked at his brother. His brother approached them, telling the doorman that this was his brother. The doorman's reaction was not late. He bowed, asking for forgiveness, saying that he did not know that this visitor would actually be his guest. Yisu said that everything was fine and they had better go, and his brother was able to see the jacket he had come in. On the back it had the words "Safety First" written on it, and he read it and said it was a pretty good phrase. Meanwhile, his team members gathered together after a hard day to finally relax and throw their first party in 3 months. But they didn't have much of a celebration. One guy was indignant that the only food they got was frozen pork. But another said that the commander told them to wait, he was probably going to grab something else tasty. The guy with the earrings replied that it would be better if he went with the commander, since he was currently dining on something luxurious. They saw cars drive onto their territory, and a man came out of one of them, whom they recognized as the boss. The new guy, who had been silently chewing grilled pork until then, immediately jumped up to greet the chef. They apologized for already starting drinking without him, but he said he had a project to finish. And then he asked where Commander Baek Yi-soo was. Hearing that he had left early, he said that it only made his job more difficult, putting his hand in his pocket. The new guy curiously asked what kind of job it was, but in response he received a bullet to the forehead because the boss pulled a pistol out of his jacket pocket. Such a shot killed instantly, and the other workers watched in horror as their recent friend fell dead to the ground. At that moment, other people got out of the cars, and the chief said that today they were disbanding their Special Forces unit. He told them not to miss a single one, and the workers were overcome with fear because today not one of them was ready to say goodbye to life. Meanwhile, the brothers were still having dinner. The eldest tried to talk to Park Yi-soo about his work, but he did not listen to him. Finally, his brother pulled out some card, saying that he could make him the manager of one of the restaurants. He placed it on the table and then asked why the soldier was wearing a construction worker's uniform, to which Yi-soo muttered something about the support of the people. But his brother was not very satisfied with this answer. Pouring wine, he asked if soldiers help civilians in their time. Yi-soo answered that they should. Then the brother returned to the prospect of working at his company, describing his duties, but Yi-soo again didn't really listen. Suddenly his phone rang and he looked at the number. It was a guy from work and the commander was supposed to answer his call. He told his brother that he had to take a call, then excused himself to the restroom. He stood near the sink and talked to a guy with earrings named Shion. He had a strange voice. In fact, that's how it was. The guy was sitting leaning against the wall and talking about the food they were eating. Then sure, he told them what had happened, about Chief Zhang's betrayal and the disbandment of their small detachment. Other workers had died earlier and were now being dumped in the same place where they had once dumped the bodies of enemy soldiers. Baek Yi-soo told him to hold on a little longer because he would go there right away, but then changed his mind, telling him to run because they were looking for him. But suddenly he heard shots through the phone and asked Shiona where they were shooting, but there was no answer, and he screamed his name in horror, but there was no answer. At this time, a group of men wearing bulletproof vests and masks that covered their entire faces approached the entrance to the restaurant. Seeing new unexpected visitors, the doorman hurried to inform them that all the seats were taken, but before he could finish speaking, his throat was cut. Isu was delayed, and his brother was already tired of waiting, when suddenly someone entered and he raised his head, asking if he had finished talking to his subordinates. But it wasn't Yisu. There were 3 armed men in bulletproof vests standing in front of him, so their visit could only mean one thing. It was a special squad, most likely sent to eliminate his brother, but for what reason, he did not know. And Su jumped out of the restroom, intending to immediately go to work, but armed men blocked his exit. As if to confirm his thoughts, one of the squad called his name, saying somewhere into the radio that the target was confirmed and they were beginning the elimination. They rushed at him. One swung a knife, but the commander stepped aside, simultaneously grabbing his hand with the weapon. He hit his attacker in the bridge of the nose with his elbow. It was his favorite blow, because as is known, the force of an elbow blow is 5 times greater than a punch. He then snatched the knife from his opponent's hand and finished him off by cutting him across the eyes, the only thing visible under the mask. Before he could recover, another member of the squad was already running towards him, and he also pulled out a knife. But his attack was also unsuccessful, and it was not for nothing that Yisu was appointed commander in the PLA, which also included military training. He let his opponent get as close as possible, and then again at the last moment he moved to the side, this time making a throw. In an instant, the enemy was already lying on the ground. Yisu put the knife to the sole of his foot and squeezed his knee tightly. Without thinking twice, the knife passed through the shoe, and the man screamed in pain, clutching his leg while Yisu turned to face the others. He had taken off his construction jacket and was now wearing a military uniform, as if he was a different person. He said their movements were too predictable to make it worth fighting, but the men attacked again. He fought off 3 of them at once, but it didn't look like he was losing. Suddenly, the 3 in front were joined by another one from behind, who intended to attack him unnoticed and finish him off. Chief Zhang stood with a cigarette in his mouth, silently looking at the place where the enemy soldiers were thrown, and now their people were there too. A subordinate approached him, saying that they had finished everything, and a special squad had been sent for Baek Yisu. The chief asked if they had only sent 1 detachment, saying that for someone like Yisu, 1 would not be enough. He turned out to be right, despite the fact that the enemy was superior in numbers. The commander won, receiving only a couple of scratches. Wiping the blood from his face, he looked anxiously at the door to the dining room of the restaurant where he and his brother had dined, and became worried. However, his brother was not so simple. In his room, he had the same painting as Yisu, where he turned out to be the winner. He even managed to leave 1 alive, and now held a knife to his throat, asking who they were and why they came. But the man was in no hurry to speak, and he cut his throat out of impatience, saying, however, that he had nevertheless been a little hasty. His attention was drawn to a radio sticking out of the pocket of one of them. A characteristic noise was coming from it, and he listened to the message. Someone said to kill Baek Yi-soo as soon as they found him, and also to finish off everyone who was with him. He was surprised to see that the bandits were still using such old-fashioned things, and the message was repeated. His face changed. He was the CEO of the financial company TS, Baek Do-kyung, the head of the Taeson Group. He was about to leave the room, heading toward the door, but suddenly someone called out to him from around the corner. It was Yi-soo. Do-gyeon asked him if these people were his guests, since alas he had not been able to greet them with warmth. They were sitting in the car, and his brother was trying to repeat the name of the acronym that, as it turned out, Yi-soo worked for. Seeing that his master was unable to cope, the driver suggested that the organization was called NAR and handed him an elastic band. Do-gyung took it, saying that it was indeed reconnaissance, but he would never have thought that one of the commanders would be his brother. So it turns out he was an intelligence agent who goes to North Korea and kills people. And Yi-soo replied that he wasn't just a bandit either. He was also Taeson's boss, essentially the leader of a criminal organization. So he was also quite dangerous and cunning. They were still driving, but Yi-soo asked to stop. But Do-kyung asked why he was doing this because it was dangerous outside. However, Yi-soo wanted to go out for this very reason. He explained that those people would not calm down until they killed him. But Do-kyung said that it would be better if he dropped him off right away near the police station, and then they would definitely not find him. Do-kyung said that they had already arrived and got out of the car. Yi-soo remarked that he had never been here before. It turned out to be a funeral site, with a procession standing on the stone steps and wreaths with a portrait of the deceased below. They didn't walk for long, and then Do-kyung turned around and asked his brother if he thought he was joking. Yi-soo didn't expect such an answer. He asked him what it all meant, and he began to have a bad feeling. Meanwhile, some people approached Do-kyung. First a man who said that everything was ready, and then a woman who was holding a photo frame in her hands. She handed it to Do-kyung, saying that within 2 hours everything would be ready to start, and he, looking at the photograph, turned to his brother. Suddenly he showed it to Yi-soo, who saw that it had his portrait on it, and then added that if everything was decided when he died, then let him do it. They stood in the temple where people usually come to mourn and pray for the deceased near his photograph. Do-kyung said that it was just a performance. It's used when you need to clear your name or escape. He said he learned it from the Japanese yakuza, but Yi-soo doubted it would work. Do-kyung agreed, saying that of course they would have doubts. But that was precisely why one important detail was necessary, which he had already taken care of. He said that Daesan was a more famous organization than Yi-soo thought, so guests would come to the ceremony to offer their condolences. After all, his brother died, which means such a visit was necessary, so such people will be able to witness his death. Will they doubt it? No, they won't, because if he, Do-kyung, said it, then that's how it was. Each of them had a special invitation, but then a car with tinted windows pulled up, clearly not fitting into the general atmosphere. The security guards in charge of maintaining order during the ceremony thought it was either food or big shots. In fact, Chief Jang was sitting in the car and was studying the deceased's portfolio, and he noticed that he turned out to be Boss Taeson's brother. One of the guards knocked on the tinted windows, saying that no one could get in here without a special invitation. The chief addressed the people sitting in the back, saying that this was their last mission. They must make sure that Baek Yi-soo was dead at any cost. The men were dressed in sweatshirts that did not hide their bulging muscles, and they got out of the car one by one. The security guard blocked their way, demanding that they introduce themselves and show their invitation. But the man in the cap looked at him silently. Then the security guard decided to act more radically and tried to knock his cap off, but received a brutal blow to the head. The other guards stood silently and watched for a while, not understanding this behavior. Then they rushed at the unexpected guests, and they attacked them in return. But it immediately became clear that the forces were not equal. It was a special detachment that arrived with the chief in order to complete its mission and disband the detachment with Commander Baek Yi-soo. The mission of the NAR Special Forces, the second detachment of the HALRA for operations in North Korea, they could not fail. They easily dealt with the guards and were now about to climb the steps, where Brother Yi-soo stood at the top with his bodyguard. But the latter turned out to have a completely different position. He began to go down, taking off his jacket along the way. Finally, he approached one of them and said that it was a family funeral and only those who were specially invited could attend. Despite being 2 meters tall, the man from the Special Forces hit him from below in the jaw, again without explaining anything about his intentions. But the giant didn't move. It was a member of the Taeson Group, the head of security, Ha Jin-woong, better known as Hanam Dong, the wall man. He grabbed the man's face with his huge hand, and the grip was so strong that his eyes popped out. Then there was a crunching sound and the man fell, while his comrades from the squad looked on in surprise because the big guy had just broken his jaw with one grip. They rushed at him, saying that he had simply caught him off guard, but Jin Woon dodged their attacks without much effort. He held one of them by the face with one hand and raised his huge fist with the other, ready to strike. However, another of the special forces struck first. He continued to strike again and again, but it had absolutely no effect, and soon Jin Woon got tired of these annoying claps. He tensed his free hand so hard that the veins stood out, and then brought down a crushing blow on the man's head, sending him crashing to the ground. Then he turned to the other one, whom he was still holding in his left hand, but he decided to somehow take the big guy in a chokehold. However, no tricks worked on him. This time he even got a little angry, and the man prepared for the worst. The wallman shook him with all his might, and that was enough, but then he threw him straight at his comrade. Chief Zhang, who was watching this in the car, grimaced in displeasure, asking why these idiots couldn't deal with just one person. Having to take matters into his own hands, he got out of the car and walked towards Jin Woon, apologizing for his subordinates. He said that there was a misunderstanding here, and while saying this, he handed him a business card with his information, which stated that he was a colonel. After saying once again that it was a misunderstanding, he explained that he was the deceased Yi Su's boss and had come here to offer his condolences. Jin Woon thought about his words for a moment, then looked up at the boy standing there, who nodded his head in approval. Seeing this, he said that he would take the boss into the room, and after a while he was already sitting in front of Yi Su's photograph. He asked, as if he were Yi Su himself, if he was really dead, and if so, how much his brother Baek Do-kyung knew. The brothers sat at the exit. Do-kyung agreed that the situation with betrayal was really difficult. He asked what Yi Su was going to do with the boss, offering his services to kill him, but his brother thought a little differently. He said that his brother should not interfere any further, but he did not understand the refusal, asking whether he should really do nothing. And Su replied that there was no need for that. He would meet with Chief Jong himself, and then they came up with this plan with the brother he pretended to be. He decided that he had pretended to be grieving enough and called out to him, then took out the knife using his brother's face. The story was that there was another brother in the family who was a successful businessman and arrived upon hearing of Yisu's death. He pointed a knife at the boss, saying that it was found in his brother's body, so if the boss didn't explain himself, the same knife would be found in him too. He held a knife to his throat, asking who killed his brother. Zhang realized that Yisu was most likely really dead. He asked the gentleman to calm down, saying that Commander Baek Yi-su had died in an accident. He thought the thug would leave him alone if he said this, adding that he could not reveal the details due to confidentiality, but the thug hit him. He said that the chief talked too much, although he clearly asked who was his brother's killer, and with these words he prepared a knife. Fearing for his life, the chief instinctively reached into his jacket pocket for his gun, but at that moment a girl in Jin-woon intervened. The girl shielded Do-kyung from attacking his boss, and Jin-woon put his hand on his shoulder, telling him that it would be better for him to leave. To make things more believable, Do-kyung yelled at him to get out of there, calling the boss a damn bastard and pretending to want to get to him. The real Do-kyung couldn't believe that he was asking so furiously who killed his brother, and Yi-su's acting simply amazed him. But it worked. He told his brother about this, asking if he had learned this in intelligence, how to work undercover and all that, to which Yi-su replied that it didn't matter. He said it would stop them for a while, but they would come again soon, so he couldn't stay here forever. Then in the funeral hall, he was not actually pretending. His emotions were not a game, he said what he felt. He said that at that moment he really wanted to kill his boss, because he had done the same to the workers from his special forces unit. His brother replied that he understood his feelings. But why shouldn't he stay here and not make any unnecessary noise? Because the main thing was that he survived. He added that he would give him a job and put his hand on Yisu's shoulder. But Yisu asked if he was really asking him to hide here and become a bandit like him. After some thought, he agreed, saying that he was indeed asking him to do so, but only because then they would both survive. Hearing these words, Yisu slapped his hand to make him put it away, and he himself walked out without saying another word. When he left, Do-kyung sighed, saying that they were definitely not twins. He told Ji-woon to take people and keep an eye on him. It was already dark, The weather outside was cool because it was raining lightly. Yisu was standing near the traffic light, getting ready to cross the road. Suddenly, he noticed that someone was following him rather carelessly. It was Jin Woon, whose surveillance always ended with him being exposed. This time, too, Yisu asked if he would continue like this, to which he replied that it was the order of the director, that is, Yisu's brother. At the same time, a man in a hoodie was watching them, holding a knife in his hand. Upon seeing Jin Woon, he hid around the corner of the house. Chief Zhang ended the conversation by giving instructions to continue monitoring Do-kyung's house. He remembered his face that day. He thought that Brother Yisu definitely knew something, but his thoughts were interrupted by someone's hand falling on his shoulder. It was his daughter who jumped on his back instead of greeting him, but he didn't mind, because he hadn't seen her for a long time. He asked how she got there, to which his daughter replied that the seats were hard and she couldn't straighten her legs the whole way. She said the flight was difficult because she wanted to see him sooner, and he replied that he would tell the pilot to fly faster. Her eyes sparkled and she said that was the power of intelligence. But he shrugged, saying that he was busy with paperwork. Do-kyung clutched the empty pack of cigarettes, saying he would go out and buy more, but the girl, apparently she was his secretary, said she would do it herself. But he told her not to be so grumpy and to let him get some fresh air, but the girl was adamant. She said that since that's what he wanted, he should go out with a security guard because it was dangerous to go alone. Then he looked at her with curiosity, and then something strange flashed in his eyes. A minute later, they were going down the elevator, accompanied by two thugs. He took her words a little differently, choosing the girl herself to go with him. Suddenly, he turned to the two guards, saying that the girl was his sister, Su-ah, and added that the boys should greet her. He approached one of them, asking if she had not become even more beautiful, and he hastened to say that his sister was indeed beautiful. Do-kyung's gaze changed abruptly. He said that everyone who called Su-ah's sister ended up the same way, and then asked the man who he was. Instead of answering, he suddenly pulled out a knife and waved it near Do-kyung's face, but he managed to dodge, simultaneously assessing the situation. But suddenly, Su-ah also pulled out a knife, so now both sides had weapons, and Do-kyung asked if she had another one for him. She said it was hidden under her skirt, and he still reached there, asking for forgiveness, because the other thug also took out a blade. The first spy rushed at Do-kyung, but was unable to strike because it was difficult to turn around in the elevator, which allowed him to dodge his attack. With a deft movement, he grabbed his arm, then pushed away and stabbed him back, preventing him from making any attempts to attack. However, this was only what he thought, as the blow cut through the man's suit and he saw that he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Then Do-kyung realized that his knife was too short to penetrate the bulletproof vest, so he had to hit him in the face. He was about to finish him off, but he heard Su-ah fall in the other corner of the elevator, with another thug advancing on her. He swung the knife, intending to strike the fatal blow and finish her off, and she huddled in the corner. He struck, but he didn't stab the girl, because Do-kyung blocked her with his body, so now he stood with a knife in his shoulder. But this didn't seem to bother him much. He grabbed the puzzled bandit and threw him into the wall of the elevator. But then another man attacked Su-ah, whom Do-kyung did not have time to finish off, so he now attacked them again. Do-kyung managed to fend off his attack, noticing how Su-ah rushed at another bandit, not allowing him to get up and take the knife. But Do-kyung lunged towards his opponent and knocked out his knife. It turned out he was quite good at handling weapons. He pressed the man against the wall of the elevator, and with some strange force, he also held the man's knife to his throat. His appearance suddenly changed. His suit was torn, and his body was very strong and covered with some strange tattoos. A scream of horror was heard from the elevator. Do-kyung had plunged both knives into the bandit's shoulders. Together with Su-ah, they were already leaving for the floor. He approached another guard, asking if he had a cigarette, and the guard reached into his pocket, saying he would look. However, instead of a cigarette, he suddenly took out a knife and plunged it into Do-kyung's stomach, who did not understand what had just happened. Then with one hand, he grabbed the impudent fellow by the face, like the big guy Jin, and with the other, he carefully took hold of the knife, saying that it was a little painful. The guard said that the gentleman had better not take it out, since he had deliberately chosen a large knife, but Do-kyung squeezed his face. For a moment, it seemed like the guard's face slid a little. Do-kyung swung his knife, but the guard jumped back. Suddenly, another curved knife appeared in his hand, more like a karambit, and his face turned out to be a simple mask. But it seems that there was still one real security guard left with them, who told the director that he would detain the bandit. However, Do-kyung told him to just give him what he asked for, which was another knife and cigarettes, and told him to keep an eye on Su-ah. He had two knives in his hands. Now he was going to kill the traitor, but before that, he decided to ask if he wanted to say something last. A young man was looking at him. It was a Special Forces assassin from the NAR, nicknamed Ghost. He said that Do-kyung talks a lot, and he spoke about the murder of his brother, asking if it was his doing. The bandit replied that if he were given the chance, he would gladly kill him. Then he rushed to Do-kyung, but he was wounded. The ghost asked if Baek Yi-soo was really dead, to which Do-kyung replied that even his boss came to offer his condolences. But for some reason, the ghost was not satisfied with this answer, and he rephrased the question, asking where Baek Yi-soo was. Meanwhile, Soo walked with Jin Woon, who said that he would guard him on the orders of the leader. Suddenly, they disappeared into a gateway, and their pursuer became confused, but the task had to be completed, so he followed them. Apparently, it was a trap, and as his face cautiously emerged from behind the house, Jin Woon struck him with all his strength. The guy barely managed to somehow put his hands out, but still flew away. He thought that with such a bodyguard, it would not be easy. On top of that, he managed to land in such a way that he broke his arm, and then Yisu came out of the shadows and asked if Jung had sent him. The guy said that he was right, and then suddenly added that he couldn't have died so easily, and for some reason his voice seemed familiar. He removed his hood, revealing his face, and now one of his subordinates, Li Xian, was looking at the commander. Jin Wong told Yi Su that it turned out he knew him, and Xian shouted that of course he knew him and showed his broken arm. The commander came up to him and put his hands on his shoulders. He said that he should have stayed with them then, and everything could have been different. But Xian said that he was the only one who survived, so the next time he went to eat delicious food, he would go with him. Then he suddenly grimaced, and when Yisu asked what was wrong with him, he replied that he just had an empty stomach and his arm was broken, thanks to his bully. As he was saying the last part, he stopped because Jin Woong's face suddenly became very dark, and now he looked creepy. They continued to fight, and he dodged the killer's attacks as best he could with his wounds. They fought, but he understood that he couldn't last long, so he needed to gather his last strength and attack without stopping. He pounced on him, attack after attack, but he successfully repelled them all. It seemed he had full strength. His vision began to blur. The image of the ghost was already floating before his eyes, and besides, the wound turned out to be quite deep. He made one last attack, this time almost hitting him, but still the opponent was strong and dodged. He said that he recognized his strength because he was quite good, but with these words he took out a fishing line from somewhere and knocked one of the knives out of his hand. The situation was critical. He asked again where Baek Yi-soo was, but Do-kyung could barely stand on his feet. He understood that everything would end here for him. He decided he had to try the last thing he could do and asked him what he had already heard, how tactless he could be. With these words, he cut his hair and then surprised everyone even more by saying that he was Baek Yi-soo and that the ghost was a fool. He really did look like Baek Yi-soo in this form, and the killer even thought about his words, wondering if it was plausible. He said it was impossible, but Yi-soo rushed at him, saying how stupid he was, even though it was hard for him to move. But seeing how he fought, Ghost said that Baek Yi-soo, the commander of the NAR Special Forces, couldn't possibly move so clumsily. But as it turned out, Do-kyung had planned everything from the very beginning. He struck with his free hand, pulling on the line from the karambit. With his last effort, he tugged at it, knocking out one of the knives, and with his other hand, he ran his hand across the bridge of the man's nose. He fell to the floor, covering his bloody face with his hands, and Yi-soo asked if he still doubted whether he was real or not. He told him to get up and fight, and he rushed at him. Only for some reason, the advantage was not on his side now. He missed the moment again as Yi-soo grabbed his hand, then squeezed it and prepared to stab him with the knife from the other side. He took the same stance as his brother who had undergone special training, which made Ghost think that it was really Yi-soo in front of him. He attacked again, saying that it was impossible, but now it was more of a self-conviction because Yi-soo was here. He even fought differently, not like before. Now he had strength and he moved completely differently, which really frightened his opponent. And then something incredible happened. The ghost wanted to spin his karambit for another attack, but Yi-soo suddenly stopped him. He pressed his own knife into his shoulder and swung to finish off the bandit, and he panicked, not knowing how to dodge. At the last second, he pushed himself away and fell on his back, avoiding the fatal blow. but now he definitely felt like it was Baek Yi-soo. It was the real Baek Yi-soo who stood over him again. Now there was no doubt, because only he knew this technique. The ghost told him not to come closer, and in a panic began to look for his knife, sensing his imminent death. Du-kyung swung his right arm and tensed it, quietly telling his brother that he should have stayed with him and seen all of this. Ghost finally managed to find his knife, and now he put it forward as his only defense, and Yi-soo rushed at him. He knocked him down but didn't even stab him, hitting him near the head, and the ghost lay with his eyes wide open because he fell on his knife. Suddenly, the weapon fell out of his hand. His body went limp and heavy, and he fell breathlessly onto the bandit. He got up and saw a car driving up to the house, which meant he had to get out of there, because he could still stay alive. Soo-ah sat in the other room, saying that this was too much, as soon everyone would notice Du-kyung's absence. She said that they should appoint a new director, but Jin-won replied that Daesan without Do-kyung would no longer be Daesan. But she didn't like that answer. She said that Director Baek would never allow something like that, and she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. But Jin-won interrupted her, and she saw the big man's tears roll down his face, and he said that there was no such thing as Do-kyung. Isu walked with his head down, and Shion hurried after him, telling him to wait for him, but the commander was thinking about his brother. Shion blocked his way, asking where he was going, and he only answered something about the wounds on his brother's body. The killer was hired by Chief Jong, as there were many cases where he hired special people for shady affairs. Shihi said he understood that, but Chief Jong and his men were not people who could be easily approached. For a moment he was afraid to look at the commander. His face was full of despair, and he said that he would find and kill them all. In the morning, in the Pangyo Techno Valley, a group of people stood on the helipad. It was a small detachment with a commander. It was T1 ICT CEO Kim Tae-won, who was sitting peeling an apple, lamenting that there was nothing edible in Pangyo. He said there was no big money to be made here, so men should play in the wide waters of Seoul. They were at a general meeting. A man approached a fence on the roof over which ropes were thrown. It turned out that they were holding a man to whom Kim Tae-won turned, asking what Chief Jong had spoken about today. The man said he didn't know what he was talking about, but Tae-won began chewing the apple, saying that if it was rotten, it should be thrown away. He cut one of the ropes and the man immediately spoke, saying he remembered being told that Taesan was having a problem. He said that their boss, Baek Do-kyung, was nowhere to be seen, so they were inactive, and this greatly interested Tae-won. But then he cut another rope, asking if the information was accurate, and the man assured him that it was all confirmed. He said that was all he heard, so he asked to get him out of here, but Tae-won only cut the last rope. The CEO turned to his subordinates and told them to gather everyone, because they were having the Taesan group for dinner that night. Fortunately, the man who had already said goodbye to life did not die, because to his surprise, it turned out to be the ground floor. Yisu walked along the Majeongdong livestock market, remembering how he had been told that it was dark under the entrance, and so it was. He made his way to the inconspicuous butcher shop, thinking about Chef Zhang's method. If you want to hide something, hide it in plain sight. These guys in security suits were also trained by Chief Zhang, which means everything should eventually lead to him. He carefully opened the door of the establishment, because if he let his guard down, he would be finished. These people would not tolerate mistakes. He walked sharply through the door, knife at the ready, but to his surprise, he saw only ordinary butcher shop workers. One of them saw him and asked if he was Baek Yi-soo, saying that if anyone else had entered, he would already be dead. And Soo approached him and asked what happened here, to which the man replied that it was all Chief Jung's fault. He said he heard on the radio that Zhang's men had taken care of everything, so the picture was no better elsewhere. At the same time, Shuan was checking another place where, as the man had said, Zhang's people had managed to visit. The man placed his hand on his shoulder, telling Yi-soo that Chief Zhang was too strong for him, and he couldn't handle it alone. He said that he had to run, and his last words were that Yi-soo doll, after which the man died right in his arms. But something in his story puzzled Yi-soo, because he had never heard of the boss being connected to any organization. Meanwhile, Tae-won reached the main building of the Taesan group and launched an attack, as this was a great opportunity. However, he couldn't believe that Taesan was so weak, even though he was also considered one of the four main groups. Suddenly, he saw the situation begin to change, and the reason for this was the appearance of Ha-jin Woong's unshakable wall. He said that he was already the fourth bastard this week who dared to attack Daesan. But Tae-won didn't like his words, and he said that in that case he would play like a real bastard, taking out a knife. But Jin Wong didn't seem to be bothered by this at all. He just sighed heavily and spread his arms, telling them to attack. However, the general attack was interrupted by the appearance of a young man who walked straight towards Jin Wong, who recognized him as Baek Yi-soo. He said that he needs this organization to avenge his brother, and therefore he asked him to give him Taeson. His eyes were full of determination, hatred, and something else. But one thing was clear. He really was going to take revenge. Then Taewon hurried towards them, but Yi-soo simply hit him. Then Taewon, with annoyance, recognized the guy as Baek Do-gyun, which meant that the director was simply hiding somewhere, and that's why he didn't come. He had a knife in his hand, and seeing that these people wanted to destroy the Daesan that he needed, he began to wave it. His blow made Taewon's nose bleed. He thought what kind of crazy person Do-gyung was doing, and told his men to attack. He said that today would be the end for Taesan, but this only made Yi-soo even more angry. He fought well. Seeing that he was overpowering one after another, Taewon shouted for a knife and rushed at Do-gyung. But Yi-soo reacted quickly. In the blink of an eye, he turned around and knocked the knife out of his hand with one swing, and Taewon became worried. And Soo approached him, but he was already scared to death. So he ordered everyone to leave, saying that he was returning to Pangyo. Jin Wong, who was watching all of this, remembered his words that without Do-kyung, Daesan would no longer be Daesan, but what if Do-kyung could be found? He turned to Yi-soo, saying that if he wanted to get Taesan, then he, Jin Wong, would help him because he trusted him. A month had already passed. The members of the general meeting of the organizations were sitting together again, but this time Do-gyung was absent from their company. Among them were 3 men and 1 woman who said she had heard that Baek Do-kyung had died, which meant the end for Daesan. Suddenly they heard footsteps. It was Yi-soo. Then Jin Wong said that in order to get Taeson, he must become Baek Do-gyun. Together with Jin Wong and Shion, he entered the meeting room of the General Assembly, which served as a hotel restaurant. He has already managed to get the same tattoos on his chest and arms as his brother, and has also learned his manner of communication. Before this, Sue taught him some things, for example, that it is better to keep your fingers behind the blade, because this will give the blade strength. She said that someone might notice them if he didn't watch his movements. It was a meeting of the leaders of the largest criminal group in Seoul, a general gathering whose purpose was obvious. Supposedly, it was to prevent conflicts between gangs, but in reality, they were waiting for their chance. There was a chance to take advantage when the clash occurred, and that was why Taeson had to be present. Sua said she didn't understand why he had to pretend to protect Daesan, and he replied that he just needed a strong organization. An organization that was larger and stronger than others. He needed it to carry out revenge for his brother. Meanwhile, Chief Jung stood next to a very important person, listening to the praise addressed to him. He was praised by Seoul Police Chief Cho Won-ho himself, saying that he had done a good job and that his skills were commendable. Jung brushed it off, saying it was all thanks to his support, but his boss said he was the good leader. However, he then pointed his finger at the mountain of concrete mix, asking why his subordinates were now buried there. Jung said it was a sacrifice for the common good, but the police chief laughed, saying it was like the proverb. But Jung continued, saying that officials are now worried and that the Special Operations Unit in North Korea is a relic of the past. He explained that he was under constant pressure and couldn't follow along, but Won-ho interrupted him by placing his hands on his shoulders. He asked if it was really that hard to eliminate a couple of people, since he had no idea how much money he had to spend. He asked why he had eliminated Do-gyung, since Taesan was a member of the General Assembly and therefore should have understood the consequences of this. But suddenly Jung stopped playing the role of a subordinate who was being scolded. He told Cho Won-ho not to show off. He showed a police badge with the Korean symbol, saying that Jo Won-ho's role in this project is to keep his nose in the air. He threw the badge into a cement pit, saying they needed a public figure, so if he didn't like his role, he should get out. As he said this, one of Won-ho's guards approached him and grabbed the boss by the collar, asking if their boss was his friend. Won-ho laughed awkwardly, noticing that he had dexterous hands. He saw him knock down one of the guards. He knocked him out with some strange blow, then took a gun out of his jacket pocket and aimed it at Cho Won-ho. General Assembly, and so what? Why should it bother him? After all, he buried his own subordinates. Won-ho waved his hands, saying that he understood everything and would definitely sort it out, because he knew the people from the General Assembly. This was what Jang wanted to hear. He suggested that they not let each other down again, saying that he would like to meet Baek Do-kyung. Present at the meeting were Gyeorang Rester CEO Ryu Tai-hyun, the boss of the Gyeorang organization in Yongsan. HHS Entertainment CEO Han Hye-sung, head of the entertainment company in the Gangnam area. Owner of the trading company Cheon Uncha Yu-hwa, head of the Korean-Chinese organization in Guro. And also Yilhak Capital CEO Lee Seung-min, head of a small organization in Gudo, Nine Knives in Yongno. Just as their conversation was in full swing, Xion intervened, peeking into the room and telling the director that the meeting was taking place here. They entered and Do-kyung took the only empty seat. All the members of the meeting were surprised by his visit. Hae-sung said that they heard that his brother had died, so it must have been hard for him since that's not usually his style. Others also took up the conversation, saying that there were rumors about a crazy funeral, so everyone asked him to tell them. Hae-sung placed the cup on the table, saying that in that case they should decide whether Baek Do-kyung deserved to sit in the seat. Do-kyung said that if he knew he could have come and supported, but since he didn't do that, then at least he should not talk about his brother. He suddenly pulled out a knife and stuck it into the table, asking who they were to talk about the qualifications of the Taeson group. Hae-sung grimaced, looking at him with both contempt and fear, and asked how they should understand these words. But Do-kyung looked at him with a creepy gaze, saying that he would answer in simple words. From now on, the Dyson group will not attend the general meeting. They were returning by car, and Jin Wong said that now the General Assembly had become their enemy. He asked Yi Su if he had a plan. However, in fact, he didn't have any plan. In that establishment, he simply said what he thought. Suddenly, Jin Woon noticed a car come out from around the corner, picking up speed and rushing straight towards them. Luckily, they managed to avoid a collision, but other cars appeared from somewhere and blocked their way. A guy in a red jacket and a brass knuckle clutched in his hand came out of one of the cars. It was Ryu Tai-hyun who rushed at their car. He broke the glass with his brass knuckles and leaned in, saying that if he could do whatever he wanted, then let Do-kyung give him decent. It all started with Yi Su's plan. The first thing he had to do was catch a rat. He remembered Ryu Tai-hyun talking about the funeral details. But that was strange, of course, his brother informed them, but obviously without such details. He said that since the meeting was not related to the funeral, it meant one thing. There was a rat among the members who was leaking information. He said that this is why he would not participate in the meeting as long as the rat was there, but he would not have to look for it either. Back then, his plan was to smoke the rat out of its hole, but now in front of him was the face of Ryu Tai-hyun, who was that very rat. Immediately after the meeting, he took a couple of cars with him as an escort and went out to pick up Do-kyung, and now he demanded that he get out of the car. Young-san's boss, who has the most problems with Dae-san, and who doesn't hide his hostility, was the rat. Then Shion's head appeared from the car and said that there was no need to break the glass, calling it a baby. Tae-hyun looked at him, asking what he had just called him, and when he repeated it, he said that he liked his impudence, but he would beat him up. He struck at Shion, but he only extended his hand, blocking the blow without much effort, since he had once worked with the commander. He asked if Tae-hyun was really a gangster, since with such a blow, and with brass knuckles at that, he should have at least hit him. Tae-hyun looked at the guy. It was obvious that he was interested in him, but their fight was interrupted by the sound of white cars parking. It was Lee Seung-min, the leader of the Nine Knives, who said that they should stop there. Tae-hyun mimicked him, saying that since Master Seung-min said to stop, then he should definitely listen. He approached him, saying that they were going to have a party after the meeting, and asked if Seung-min would like to join. Suddenly, a man put his hand on his shoulder, saying that Tae-hyun had grown up, and he looked at him with displeasure. Shion asked Jin Wong who the old man was, but he replied that they were Il-hak's elite, who were the best in Seoul in the past. This was also evident from the faces of Tae-hyun's bandits, who were surprised that old man Choi Jung-ho from Nine Knives was here. He was the executive director of Il-hak Capital, Choi Jung-ho, a second-generation Gudo. Tae-hyun looked at them with resentment and a little anger, cursing Il-hak and saying that Tae-san was his prey. Jin Wong suddenly got out of the car and decided to greet his old acquaintances, telling Sunbae that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Jung-ho was surprised, asking when he had grown so big, and Jin Woo said that he should have visited them earlier. Lee Seung-min meanwhile approached Tae-hyun, saying that they would like to invite Di-song as their guest and asked if he was okay with it. He approached the door where Yi-su was sitting, offering to take him in his car, since the glass of this one was damaged. Still, Yi-su got out of the car, saying that it was quite scary, but somewhat expected. and Sheng Min opened the doors for him. Sheng Min told the two to go ahead, and he was going to talk to his friend, but Jin Wong said he had to accompany the director. However, Yisu told them not to worry, saying that the car would be too small for everyone anyway. They left, and Sheng Min asked about Decent. He asked if they were really going to leave the general meeting, to which Yisu also responded by asking if they hadn't been kicked out. But Sung Min said that if they left the organization, problems would definitely start with the others. He continued by saying that there is nothing but checks and competition in the congregation, so it needs strength to survive. Yisu didn't quite understand what this guy was trying to achieve, so he asked the director what his intentions were. After thinking for a while, Sung Min looked away and told Mr. Beck that he needed strength. That's why he was here. Meanwhile, Jung Ho asked Jin Wong when he was going to join them, but Jin Wong said that he was working for Disan. Jung Ho replied that Jin Wong's past was connected to Gudo, and they still had a place for him, but the big man was adamant he was loyal to Disan. He said again that his organization is the Tyson Group. Moreover, there are things that he must do. But Jung Ho said that he had no business in Disan because he would fall today, and it had already been decided. Upon hearing this, Jin Wong turned pale. He was taken to an unfamiliar place where he saw a group of men in white suits who turned out to be from the Nine Knives. They said they would take care of him, and Yisu asked Shung Min what that meant, but he replied that it was the best they could do. Suddenly it dawned on him. He just realized how wrong he was, and he looked angrily at Shung Min, saying that he was the rat. He turned to Shion, telling him to detain Lee Sung Min, and he agreed, telling the commander to be careful as well. And then he hit the driver, Shung Min, who was about to step on the gas as soon as Do Kyung was in the hands of the knives. Yisu got out of the car and was already being looked at by a man in a white suit and glasses who said that everything would end quickly. Tai Hyun sat in the car, annoyed that he had to let Do Kyung go, giving in to Shung Min and his nine knives. He said that his people were fools if they did not understand such obvious things as the power of Ilhak. He said that he had seen them with his own eyes. Just 3 of them were capable of destroying the entire Kambuk region, which described their power very well. He continued, saying that there were once 9 of them, now there were only 6 left, but 3 would be enough to destroy the area. Then he thought, what kind of idiot would oppose them? But right at that moment, Baek Yi-soo, that is, Du Kyung, hit one of the men. Tai Hyun thought that if there was someone who was capable of destroying Gudo, he would definitely become the strongest in Seoul. Last night, they were sitting by the lake. Police Chief Won Ho was fishing, and he was thinking about the upcoming crime against Taesan. Won Ho asked if he didn't think that Daesang was no longer the same, just a bunch of small trash. He said that because of the project of the higher-ups, Baek Do-kyung had lost his younger brother, and now Daesan was in complete disarray. Sung Min agreed, but said that starting a war now would be very difficult, to which Won Ho replied that he was simply being evasive. While throwing the trash off the cigarette, the boss said that this was not allowed, because then he would lose everything, so Ilhak should not be careful. And besides, if he had mentioned the 9 knives at a general meeting, no one would have dared to squeak in his direction. The boss explained how he, Lee Sung-min, would become the real chairman, and to do that, he needed to reorganize Ilhak. Then Sun Min stood up and looked at the lake. He said that he would do everything, but he wanted something in return. He said that in return, he would also like to take part in the project that his boss had mentioned earlier, and the boss was surprised by his insatiability. He said the project was called One Sink, but he had no idea how Sung Min was going to get a spot there. Yisu hit the man with glasses again, causing him to lose his footing slightly, almost falling to the ground, while the others stood there in surprise. Then he finally knocked the man down. It was clear that he fought well, and then asked if they really thought they could take possession of Taesan. It didn't matter whether it was an order or their personal decision. They were challenging him as a leader. He looked at the men in suits with his furious gaze and said that today Ilhak would be destroyed. Sun Min decided not to wait any longer, intending to get out of the car. However, as soon as he reached for the door, a knife flew towards him. The knife was thrown by Shion, who said that he was actually ordered to grab him, so he could not be allowed to get out of the car. The man Yi-soo had hit was named Hyung Nim, and he was now standing on the ground again, saying that he would have been dead long ago if he had been older. He turned to the other members of Gudo, who were laughing a little, as it had been a long time since they had seen anyone hit Hyunam. One of them rushed at Yi-soo, but he put out his hand, squeezing it at the elbow, thus blocking the blow. But the enemy was superior in numbers. Another man struck right after him, but Yisu was able to dodge his blow as well. Only this man turned out to be much smarter. It was Choi Guan-pal, the seventh knife in the Gudo organization, who grabbed Yisu by the collar and now pulled him towards himself and struck him. And when he was on the ground, another man, the ninth knife of Gudo, Li Guchang, ran up to him and kicked him in the head. Jan Tok Bei, the eighth knife of Gudo, was already waiting for him when Yisu rolled away and swung to finish him off with a powerful blow to the jaw. At the last moment, he dodged, jumping away from the place where the man had struck. But Hyunam was already rushing towards him from behind. And Su noticed that they were skillfully attacking from different sides, which meant he needed to look for their blind spots and attack when they were not together. The nine knives of Ilhak, everyone talks about their former glory, but there is something that everyone has forgotten. At the same time, Jin Woon was fighting with his once good friend, who now wanted to lure him over to the side of the nine knives. However, there was still something that was unclear, and this nuance was explained by Shion, who realized that he had to intervene. After all, even though Ilhak had nine knives, if he doesn't intervene now, all these guys could end up badly. Of course, the men from the nine knives were incredibly strong, but the problem was that the one fighting them was the commander of the NAR, Baek Yi-soo. Shion jumped out of the car and kicked one of the knives in the head, and the men didn't expect another one from Daesan to come. And Su fought with all his might. He did not spare his enemy, because there was another reason behind his victory, because in this way he would be able to take revenge. The men looked at him in surprise. They were perplexed as to how Taeson's boss could single-handedly stand up to the most powerful organization. Guangpao swung his leg for a crushing blow, but for some reason Hyung Nim shouted at him to stop. Baek Yi-soo recalled the words of his wrestling coach, who once told him that there are no special tricks in wrestling. He said that there are people who are full of strength and have goodwill, so they never fall, so they can only be immobilized. Their arms and legs must be tied so that they cannot move, because no matter how much willpower a person has, eventually his body will not withstand it. Guangpao fell, clutching the leg he had just swung at Yi-soo, but it turned out that Yi-soo had managed to grab it and then twist it. Neither Hyung Nim nor Sung Min could believe what Do-gyong was doing with nine knives, and Sung Min remembered what Chief Wan Ho had said about his brother. He mentioned that he was a pretty capable guy, the commander of a special forces unit of the NAR, so his brother was probably no slouch either. Hyun Nim wondered if this was too much for a normal beating, where the one doing the hitting and the one defending were reversed. Luckily, just when Yi-soo was about to hit Hyung Nim, Sung Min intervened, got out of the car and walked towards Yi-soo. He told them to stop and then put his hand on Yi-soo's shoulder, saying that he needed to talk to him. From the very beginning, this seemed strange to him, because even though Baek Yi-soo was eliminated, his twin brother was still alive. He told him that such aggressive behavior at the general meeting, and also the appearance he made there, betrayed that he was not Baek Do-kyung. But Yi-soo's reaction was different from what Sung Min thought. He grabbed his hand, asking what difference it made if he knew his real name. He said that it would not be difficult for him to kill him too, but Sung Min only narrowed his eyes, saying that he would like to negotiate. Shion, who had also stopped fighting with knives, formed a T with his hands as if indicating a timeout. The negotiations were held near the garages and were attended by Baek Yi-soo, Shion, and Jin Woong from Daesan, as well as Lee Sung-min and Nine Knives from Ilhak. Sitting on a chair opposite Yi-soo, Director Lee said he admitted that they hadn't taken them seriously at first, but they had already paid for it by fighting. Yi-soo told him not to drag it out and asked him what deal he was going to offer, since that was why he stopped the fight. Son Min extended his hand and was handed a file. He said that not long ago they received a request to get rid of him and Taeson. He said that they would be able to find out who did it and for what purpose in this file, because speaking globally, it was an entire project. He made a deal, saying that they would provide them with information about the organization that decided to attack Daesan, but in exchange, they would work for Ilhak. Ilhak needed a strong organization, so these were favorable conditions for Daesan, but Yi-soo suddenly stood up to leave. There was no point in him sitting there anymore, so he said that if this file was the main condition, then the negotiations were over. And besides, if that was exactly how it was, then wouldn't it have been better for them to take this data file here and now themselves? He headed for the exit, but his path was blocked by Jin Woong, who reminded him that this was a good opportunity to win Ilhak's trust. However, Yi-soo said that this really got to him because the guys from Ilhak were just a bunch of bandits who couldn't be considered a threat at all. He added that there could be no talk of any trust in such a case, since it was precisely because of this that his comrades and brother were brazenly killed. But Sungmin decided not to retreat prematurely. He also stood up, approached Yisu, and addressed him by name again. He told him to be careful in his words and actions, because such a specimen no longer exists, and with these words he brought it to the burning tank. Yisu took out the knife, saying that he wouldn't dare, but something still made him wary. This guy Lee Sung-min was not an ordinary bandit. Jin Wong wanted to stop him, but Yisu suddenly shouted that he didn't trust those bandit rats from Ilhak. He said that from now on they won't tell him what to do, because from now on Ilhak will be under Deeson's leadership. He held a knife to Shungmin's throat, saying that he would also take their CEO hostage, and Shungmin looked at the blade nervously. Nine Knives looked at all this in amazement, amazed at both the courage and the audacity of this guy from Taisan. Hyun Nim and the other Knives were about to go to the director's aid, but Jung Ho shouted at them not to move. He realized that Do Gyung was not satisfied with the proposal, so he approached them and carefully pulled his hand with the knife away, offering an alternative. He said that he, Choi Jung-ho, the CEO of Nine Knives, would go with them as a hostage instead of Shung-min. With these words, he handed the file to Yisu, but the latter did not share his enthusiasm, asking if he really thought he was worth anything. But in Jin Wong's opinion, this would be enough, because if Baek Do-kyung were in his place, he wouldn't do such stupid things. After hearing about his brother, Yisu cooled down a bit and said that Shion was then responsible for transporting and monitoring Choi Jung-hong. He was interrogated 5 years ago when he returned from infiltrating North Korea and was under investigation for espionage. Colonel Kim Jae-wook asked what his mission was, to which he replied that it was confidential information. The colonel said he had crossed military lines and in a North Korean uniform, but he replied that the nature of the mission covered everything. Then the colonel slammed his palm on the table, saying that they weren't very happy with their North Korean operational corps. Otherwise, he would personally influence his dismissal, because Yi Su was wrong if he thought they would do everything he asked. The final argument was that he had probably done a lot of dirty work, which meant that he was also stressed out by the whole situation. However, his interrogation was then interrupted by the then-young Chief Jung, who was then working as the head of the Special Operations Department of the Intelligence Department. Upon seeing him, Jae-wook said that catching spies was his job, and with that he handed over the case of Baek Yi-soo to him. Jung said that Yi-soo was not a spy because he was his friend, but Jae-wook looked at him suspiciously. Then Jung took out a cigarette and walked up to him, taking off his glasses, and then said that perhaps the colonel had not heard after all. His face suddenly changed, and there was a feeling that he himself was the colonel. He looked at him with such a look that he even became nervous. He said he didn't care whether he thought he was a communist or not, but the kid wasn't a communist, and his word was enough. Without waiting for the colonel's answer, he removed the handcuffs from Yi-soo, saying that they could go, and Jae-wook only managed to shout that this was disobeying an order. He asked if there was anyone outside to catch these two insolent fellows, but soon he himself came out and saw that all the guards had been killed. Jung asked if he had been intercepted on his return, but Yisu said that fortunately they did not believe him and no one knew about the secret operation. That's when he said those fateful words. The boss said that in any case he trusted him because he was like family to him. He recalled this as he sat in Tayson's office, looking at a photograph of himself as the commander of the unit that had shot Jung. At that moment, Jin Wong entered the room and said that Shion was currently looking after Choi Jung-ho as he had requested. He was holding his head. It was clear that something was bothering him, but Jin Wong suddenly told him to let him say something. He suddenly grabbed him by the collar and said that he had made a mistake in his choice, saying that he could not trust him with Deeson. After all, he will never be able to become the same kind of leader as his brother Baek Do-kyung, who would not have allowed such an outrage. At this time, Chief Jung was sitting in one of the snack bars. He called his daughter, asking if she was studying well and eating well. She said that Dad was being too grumpy when suddenly a familiar man approached him. It was Police Chief Wan Ho. He said he knew a couple of good places he should write about and asked why here. But Jung put his finger to his lips, telling him to be quiet, and he told his daughter on the phone that he would call back later. Wan Ho thought that his daughter should have returned from studying abroad by now, so he must have talked to her. He asked if Jang had dealt with the general meeting, but he was in no hurry to answer, and he hadn't eaten much, so the news wasn't good. But Chief Jang said that, in any case, it was just a bunch of amateurs and they were professionals. They both started eating, saying that the One Sing project would be launched very soon, and then no organization would be able to stop them. Zhang added that this time he had to meet the General Assembly in person, and Manhua was surprised by his words. He said he felt that if he wanted to launch the One Sing project, he would first need to take control of the general meeting. Besides, if the officials find out about this, then everything will go swimmingly. After all, they have already dealt with Bayek Yisu and his comrades. However, Zhang said that it was not that simple, because if direct pressure was put on the meeting's organizations, chaos would ensue. Choi Jung-ho spoke to Lee Sung-min on the phone, saying that it was not such a big deal and that he felt like he was on vacation. But Sung-min still apologized, saying that he was sorry anyway, since Jung-ho was currently being held hostage. However, the big man from Ilhak only smiled and asked if this decision was not made for the good of the organization. He said that was why everyone decided to trust and follow his decisions, even though the result was a bit awkward. They said goodbye, agreeing to meet sometime, and Sung-min said that now he should get a good rest. Chung-ho also hung up, and Shi-yeon, who was sitting next to him, noticed that it was as if he was talking to his grandson, not his boss. He continued by saying that even though he was caught because of such a boss, he still has complete trust in him. Jung-ho just shrugged, saying that he simply respected his boss, and as for his hostage status, it was his decision. But Shion asked if it wasn't the boss who told him to do this. After all, an order was an order, and now he was the one taking the rap for it. For some reason, Jung-ho asked if Tyson was really such an organization, because if that was really the case, then he would be disappointed. Jin-woong repeated that Yisu should leave, but Yisu became angry, asking if he really thought he could give it away first and then take it back. He had already said that he was using Taesan for revenge, and besides, at the moment Ilhak was in their hands. But he said that the problem was not in his methods at all. First of all, he had to pretend to be Baek Do-kyung, because so far it was not visible. He said that if Baek Do-kyung were here, he wouldn't have done such a thing, because Daesun was an organization that trusted him. And if Yisu wanted to be like his brother, then he had to show the organization this same faith, then he could replace Do-kyung. This belief, these methods, that is why Daesun still participated in these children's games as a general meeting. Yisu answered him. He said that the organization should simply obey the boss's orders, and as for his methods, he would simply use force. Hearing this, Jin-woong silently took off his jacket, and then said that since Yisu thought of it as childish fun, then let him handle it alone. Yisu didn't think for long. He jumped up from his place and rushed at the big guy, and then jumped, putting his knee out to strike. But Jin-woon was able to catch him. He grabbed Yisu by the shirt and threw him to the ground, so that he didn't even have time to grab onto anything and was knocked down. The big guy asked if that was all the intelligence service could do, but before he could finish speaking, he was kicked in the chin by Yisu. The blow was quite noticeable, and a characteristic maroon mark was left on Jin-woong's face, but he understood that Yisu was not going to retreat. Jung-ho asked if it was an organization that obeyed only by force, who would follow it. They trust each other only with their fists and pride, and they fight wars only because they have united with other people. If you meet a person who will only do what he does, and a person who will stab you in the back, then among them you can find another. Someone you want to believe in and follow, because it will seem to you that this path is the most correct. And Su finally overpowered Jin-woon, swinging his arm to strike, but he did not get up and was now lying on the floor of the room, where everything was turned upside down. He let go of the big guy and turned to leave, saying in parting that he was wrong, and the problem was not in his methods of solving problems. He said that their system did not necessarily have to be based on force, because if the organization decided everything by force, then it would already be an army. Shuan's phone rang, and when he saw who was calling, he stood up and prepared to leave, telling Jung-hong that he was interesting and that they would chat again sometime. He suddenly wondered if there was someone who couldn't trust anyone, whether that person would try to put pressure on other people by force. Seeing Shuan, whom he had summoned, Yisu said that from today on, they would establish their own organization. They will do this with the help of strong people who do their job honestly. He gave Xian a list of those who needed to be contacted. He said that the deadline for this was 1 week, after which they would get rid of the general meeting and become the strongest organization in Seoul. Jin-woon lay on the floor, a little annoyed that he lost to Baek Yi-soo, even though he was the commander of the NAR Special Forces Unit. He remembered how 4 years ago he worked in a butcher shop, and that was when he first met Baek Do-kyung. One day he came to him again, but Jin-woon was not happy to see this man, because it was clear from him that he was involved in dirty deeds. Then Do-kyung said that if Jin-woon continued to be so unkind, he might soon lose his business. However, Jin-woon only told him that they didn't allow smoking in the establishment, and then Do-kyung apologized, changing the subject. But he pointed to a couple of beaten men scattered around the diner, asking if they weren't his customers. But Jin-woon told him to stop it and get lost before he made any more noise, and then added that it was already late. But suddenly a man in a red suit appeared from behind the door and was very surprised to see Jin-woon. He said that he had heard many different rumors, but it was indeed Jin-woon, and then asked if he really worked here now. It was Lee Hung-gu, director of the Hook Il-soo organization, which was part of the Garang group and dealt with loans and credits. He approached Do-kyung saying that the boss didn't serve all sorts of bandits here, but he said that he was a regular customer. Hung-gu looked at him in surprise, asking what he just said, whether he had completely lost his fear, but Do-kyung's face was serious. Then Hung-gu walked up to him, took his face because it seemed familiar to him, and asked if he was the one who attacked their guys from Hook. He asked how he dared to do that, as if he had an extra life lying around in his pocket. However, Do-kyung was not going to play the victim and listen to his taunts. Now he asked how anyone could even call themselves Hook. He took one of Hung-gu's hands and put the knife to his wrist, asking if he shouldn't be one-armed if he was in the Hook. A terrifying scream came from the diner, and the men from Hook who had remained outside hurried inside. Hung-gu cursed, asking how Do-kyung could even dare to do something like that, since if Goring found out about this, he would be in trouble. However, he asked in response why this should bother him, since they were Taisan, so he could run and cry to his Garang. Hook members burst into the establishment and rushed to take the boss away, first going to the hospital because he had a severed finger. Jin-woon asked if he was just going to let them go, but Do-kyung said that he too had just sat and watched as those guys were beaten. He noticed that the store was very dusty, and there wasn't even a menu, which meant Jin-woon had no plans to run a business. He said that he just wanted to get rid of the bandits, and he had just helped him with this, so wouldn't he like to join him now? Jin-woon asked if he even knew who his opponent was, but Do-kyung again said that they were daesang, so it didn't matter. Then Jin-woon handed him the rubber band on his fist, telling him to tie his hair with it because he looked like a butcher. Do-kyung thanked him, but said that he really had trouble running a business here. Now Jin-woon was looking again at the very same elastic band that he now always wore for Mr. Baek. Now, however, there was no longer any need for this, because he was dead, and in his place came his younger brother, with whom he had just fought. He sighed, thinking about how different the twins were, but he liked Do-kyung's character better. Hung-gu sat in the chair and wanted to scratch his head, but again discovered that he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. He cursed loudly, saying that he could not get used to it, remembering the one who did this to him. He couldn't forget the pain and humiliation of the last 4 years, so he decided that today was the day for revenge. He said that Taesan left the general meeting and is now powerless, so today they will destroy Taesan Group. The men who were part of the Garang Group unanimously supported the boss's idea. Their total number was 50 people. Suddenly they heard someone knocking on the door, and they looked there asking what it could be. But soon they found out for themselves because the door suddenly swung open, and they saw how an unfamiliar guy hit one of them. The rest stood in confusion, not understanding who dared to attack them at such a time because they were part of the Garang. But the man whom they had initially mistaken for a boy because of his ridiculous hat walked inside as if he wasn't afraid at all. He had bright blue eyes and pierced ears. He reached for his hat to take it off, and the men suddenly recognized him as Boris. Boris worked as an ordinary builder, and that day he was asked if he had seen who had done such a nasty thing. The head of the construction site pointed somewhere at the wall, asking who could have come up with such an absurdity. There was a huge graffiti painted on the wall in the form of a 5-pointed star, which was now displayed there. But Boris didn't answer the main question. He looked away, for some reason lost in thought about something of his own. Meanwhile, Xion was clarifying some details from the biography of this man with Yisu. They were near the garages and were talking about him. Xion said that the man's nickname was Shepherd and asked if he hadn't returned to Russia. But Yisu replied in the negative, saying that he was hiding as a foreign worker and that he was here now. This was the first man on his list of people with whom he was going to create his own organization. His name was Boris. He was from the Russian mafia, a security inspector, and the boss's hound, also known as the Shepherd. He saw Yisu in the garages and lunged at him with a knife when he called his name. Xian was then doubtful whether such a person would want to work with them, because his nickname alone was already frightening. Yisu took out a flash drive and held it in front of the attacking Boris to attract his attention. It worked and the man stopped with a knife to his throat, but Yisu said he had come to make a deal with him. He showed him the flash drive, and it was clear that the man understood a little of what was being discussed, so he took the knife from his throat. He took off his helmet, revealing his bald head, on which was a strange tattoo. On his head was a hole with red claws sticking out. The tattoo was called Demon in a human mask. It looked truly terrifying, and in this form he appeared before Honggu and the members of his organization. But Honggu did not take him seriously, saying that such a hindrance was unacceptable on the day of the destruction of Tyson. He ordered to deal with him. Two men rushed at Boris, but he didn't even lift a finger, which surprised them a little. But they quickly realized where he got so much confidence and power from, because he pointed the barrel of a pistol at the attackers. Of course, it was a real pistol, because who needs fights if everything can be resolved with a couple of shots? He struck with an incomprehensible side blow from the hilt, but it was a powerful blow, and the man who received it instantly fell back. Another of the attackers stood in amazement. He still could not believe that they were facing an armed opponent. He decided to quickly take out a knife to attack the insolent man unnoticed, but he had already aimed at his head. He called them idiots, saying that no weapon would have time to damage him because he would send a bullet faster than that. For now he held back, and seeing that the man was distracted by his words, he hit him in the face with his free hand. The rest of Hook also rushed to the attack, saying that it would be better if they all attacked together. Some even managed to grab Boris by the arms, preventing him from aiming properly and firing. Another one grabbed him in a chokehold, trying to squeeze his huge neck, but Boris didn't seem to care. Suddenly, he bit the hand of the one who was trying to strangle him, biting under his jacket and shirt with his teeth. Of course, the clothes prevented him from feeling the skin a little, but the man still felt something, and he really didn't like it. He swung his free hand to hit the insolent shooter, but he only gave him a strange look. In an instant, the man was on the ground, and Boris was standing over him. Now it was his turn to do the moves. He picked up the knife that had fallen from the other man's hand as he tried to get it, and turned to face his victim. With one hand he grabbed his face, and with the other he clutched the knife, holding it near the head of the man, who was already losing consciousness. Suddenly he plunged the blade into his body, but the poor guy didn't even have time to scream. Honggu watched this, overcome with horror. Raising his bloodied gloved hand, he said that people raise demons to hide their weakness. Before Honggu could answer, Boris's hand was already on his head, and he was overcome with even greater horror. Boris squeezed the knife again, asking if there was a demon inside him, while his gaze was essentially like that of a demon. At that moment, Xian ran into the establishment, quickly finding Boris with his gaze and telling him to stop. He said that he had done a good job, and the bald man seemed to listen to him, moving the knife away from Honggu. Boss Hook said that they were actually from Garang, but Xian only said that it was clear then, saying that they themselves were from Tayson. Xian called Yisu, saying that the director of HK Kaital from Garang Group had been captured, referring to Honggu. He wondered if Tayson was really that global, while Xian said that with Boris it really was easier. Speaking of simplicity, he told the commander that he knew about Boris's skills, but whether they would be able to control him, he was against it. But Yisu simply agreed that the man had good skills, adding that, moreover, he would do anything for a fee. Now they spoke for another member of their potential organization, but Xian doubted him too, saying that such a capitalist would hardly suit them. Then the guy with a knife attacked Yisu, who came to talk about joining his organization. And Su managed to get his knife out, and this allowed him to defend himself. The one who attacked him asked what he was doing here and who sent him. He was a North Korean spy and asked who he was and who had sent him because he was very concerned about it. Lee Kyung-chun, 17, was a North Korean undercover agent, also known as Weasel, who was targeted by the Naya and was on the run. Suddenly he took his knife, but only to transform it, because it turned out to be a butterfly knife. Despite his young age, he was quite skilled in it, so Yisu had to dodge his attacks. He fought with all his might because the guy shouldn't be underestimated. Even though he was young, he was very capable. Suddenly, he managed to knock the knife out of Yisu's hand, and it flew a decent distance away. To top it all off, the guy even managed to wound him, but Yisu only greeted him, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was clear that the guy was surprised by this. He even asked again what he had said, because it turned out that he knew him. This young man had killed all his colleagues and superiors when he fled to the south, so now he didn't understand how Yisu could know his name. Memories took him back 3 years to the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Then they gathered together, and the man in uniform introduced himself as Li Wu-chang, a major in the General Intelligence Bureau. They were still very young, and he asked them if they knew where they were now and what kind of place it was. When he received no answer, he said it was a place where North and South unite for profit, the Kaesong Industrial Complex. He said that they create goods in North Korea and send them to South Korea to make a living. In short, doing dirty work. He asked if they understood what capitalism was, saying that those southern idiots didn't even take them seriously. Many things have been done in the North, but what they have done is not simply a product of capitalism. They made people who could bite their necks like animals. That's how they raised them. In the eyes of each of these children, there was no compassion for a person, but only a killer instinct. Their special name was Laska. It was their duty and mission to protect their homeland. The plan for training underage operatives was to work at the industrial complex during the day and train undercover agents at night. Kaesong was in close proximity to South Korea, so the children were sent along with the goods, but this plan had a drawback. A man called out to him and called him by name, which was rare under their regime. In one hand, he held a box with something tasty inside, and in the other, he had a pack of the same treat. He placed the box in front of the boy, telling him to have a snack with this, since he had already been working hard. He told him to eat slowly and not to forget to share with his friends. But the guy was already greedily chewing on the treats. The taste of capitalism revealed by the Kaesong Industrial Complex tempted these children, especially Kyung-chun, who was quite poor. 2 years later, they were still training, their training only becoming more rigorous and brutal. The commanders who supervised them said that it would take about 2 years to complete their ideological education. However, the chief commander said that everything should be finished this week. They had to get the guys into action by then. He explained that it was an order from above, although he personally did not like it either, but they had no choice. Kyung-chun asked the uncle if everything was okay with him, because he could tell from his face that something had happened. He held out his hands and the man remembered that he had promised him cookies, but asked him to wait a little, since the goods would only be delivered to him in the evening. He did find one cookie, and he gave it to the lucky guy, but said that he would still have to wait until night. And at night, Kyung-chun was already carrying out another task. Still holding the cookie in his hand, tears involuntarily rolled down his face. One of his comrades told him to hurry up and leave that cookie, because in South Korea he could eat his fill of them. They said that first they needed to take care of the driver, who turned out to be the man who gave Kyung-chun the cookies. Kyung-chun asked how they were going to take care of him, to which the boys asked if he really thought he was just giving them a ride. He protested, telling them to stop. There had to be another way, but the guy had already opened the door, saying they didn't have time for that. He asked what they were talking about, but before he could finish speaking, Kyung-chun slit his throat. He repeated that he had already said to give him a little time, he would find another way, but the guy was already dead. The rest of his comrades looked at him with surprise and horror, and he asked them what had happened. They were silent, and now he began to worry, asking if they really didn't agree with him. He opened the driver's door, looking inside and addressing the man who was still sleeping. He asked if he could give him a ride to South Korea, and he had such a genuine smile on his face that he couldn't resist. But in fact, before that, he had killed all his comrades, and now he alone was trying to move to the south, saying that it would suit him better. Major Li Wuchang approached the man, who begged him not to do it, even though he knew he was doomed. He asked why he did this to his comrades because it was 3:30, and everyone, including the special instructor, were killed by Lee Kyung-chun. At 3:55, a secret agent intervened, infiltrating during Lee Kyung-chun's unexpected actions. This agent turned out to be Baek Yi-soo, and Kyung-chun has since been called Weasel and has become the target of surveillance. At this point, his report ended. He cut the commander's throat, and another of his penetrations was successfully completed. Returning to the present, he pointed the butterfly knife at Kyung-chun's throat, praising his skills, saying that such things were only taught in North Korea. Then the guy raised his hands and said that it seemed that if he really was from the north, which he had no doubt, because he was able to take his knife, Isu said that he had actually been following the guy for quite a long time, and he asked if he was going to kill him. He said that it was very suspicious at the time, so he asked what he wanted from him if he didn't come to kill. And Su took out his favorite chocolate chip cookies, saying that he came to offer him a deal. Hearing about the deal, Kyung-chun took a cookie from him, and his eyes lit up. He said that it was quite a capitalistic approach. Meanwhile, Tae-hyun was relaxing at the Garang Group headquarters, Red Crown Hotel. Suddenly, he threw a bottle of expensive wine at the man who was reporting the situation, and he came with bad news. Tae-hyun asked again how it was possible that 3 hotels from their organization had already closed in just half a day. The speaker apologized and added that the district administration also said that nothing could be done. But Tae-hyun asked why they didn't find out everything themselves when they should have, and he grabbed the man by the ear. He asked why he even needed such incompetent members like them, but at that moment another one of their Goreng group ran in. The man reported that Taesun had attacked the lending business of Crook from Hanam-dong, and Tae-hyun realized who was behind it all. He ordered everyone to get ready, saying that they were going to go to Daesan in Hanam-dong. They were walking down the corridor, but suddenly their attention was drawn to a guy who appeared out of nowhere and was now watching them. He mockingly asked if the men from Goreng really boasted that they were bandits, because in his opinion, this was a lie. Then Tae-hyun saw him, and his face twisted in displeasure, because he recognized the ghost in this guy. He held one of the guards hostage and then said that he must have broken his arm, so he apologized. It was very disrespectful to the Garang group and Tae-hyun, so he swung his brass knuckles at the insolent man. Even though he was a first-class killer, Tae-hyun couldn't allow his organization to be so brazenly humiliated. But the ghost only dodged the attack, which enraged him even more. But then another man appeared, apologizing to Tae-hyun. It was Chief Jung who apologized, saying that his guys could be quite unbearable, adding that he had heard that Grang had problems with her business. He said that if Tae-hyun listened to a few of his requests, they might be able to help him with it. Then Tae-hyun realized that his hotels were closed because of them, not because of Tyson, and he pushed back his chair, agreeing to talk. Still holding the brass knuckles in his hand, he asked if they were going to beg him for mercy. The ghost sitting opposite laughed, asking for forgiveness, because he could not get used to their gangster manner of communication. He said that at this rate, Tae-hyun would really run into trouble one day and pay with his life. He was about to stand up, asking how he dared to speak like that, but Jung stopped him, making a proposal. He told the director to calm down, saying that he was really not in a winning position. He explained that it was not he who should ask him for a favor, but he who should beg him for help, and his face changed. Everyone knows that the wolf is one of the strongest predators of the canine family. Of course, he is smaller than the same predators as a bear, lion, or tiger, but this did not bother him. Nevertheless, he was able to become the strongest, surpassing them all. After all, unlike other predators, he hunts and lives in a pack, and this is a huge advantage, in fact. They also have one individual who leads this pack, and such an individual is personified by charisma. Such an individual is called a leader. He was the main one in the pack, and the other members obeyed him because he was the leader. The Garang trading group could also be compared to a pod, and its name meant giant whale. And in Gorang, such a leader is Ru Tae-hyun. He told Jang that he said funny things so that they, Gorang, would beg him for something. However, he only phlegmatically lit a cigarette, asking what Garang had to do with it, which greatly puzzled Tae-hyun. Jung dug into his pocket, saying that their organization touched many areas of activity, from loans to the hotel business. But in the end, they are just pathetic bandits, aren't they? As he said this, he took a pistol out of his jacket. He said that unfortunately, a hunter with a gun had come to the pack of wolves from Garang, and he was now in front of them. There was already a special squad standing behind him, and Jung said that they were different from them, the amateurs, because they were professionals. But Tae-hyun's people also managed to gather behind him, and he said that in that case they should declare war. However, Chief Jung was not at all frightened by such statements. He repeated once again that Tae-hyun should calm down and listen to him. He said that it was time for them to get down to business, and with these words he took out some folder with documents. He handed the folder to Tae-hyun, who glanced at its contents, but he clearly didn't like it. He studied the document carefully and then looked at his boss with contempt. He asked if he really thought he would fall for it, since it was all suspiciously tempting, and the document had the inscription "One-sink" on it. He asked why Jong offered them such a good project, because he knows that if they go down, it will definitely be together. However, the boss said that it was a business proposition because they would provide them with a workforce that, he repeated, was professional. But Tae-hyun said that he only talks about his professionals, so he tore up his proposal. He added that they needed to be confident that they could be trusted to do business, and he suggested looking at their abilities. Shuan stood on the street and tried to call someone, but the person didn't answer, which made him a little worried. He looked at the time and saw that their meeting should have started long ago, but he was still not there. He wrote to him asking where he had been hanging out, whether he had fallen asleep since they had agreed to meet at that time, but there was no answer. Then he called the commander, asking what he should do now, since the one they were waiting for never showed up. Yi-soo, who was in another place, received the signal through the receiver in his ear, asking if it was heard. He told Xian to wait a little, because perhaps he would call him back, but for now he, Yi-soo, was a little busy with Laska. Hearing about Laska, Xian breathed out a surprised breath into the phone, asking if they had encountered any problems along the way. He doubted whether the boy was any use at all, but he only said that because he didn't know his abilities. He nimbly jumped up to two men who met them on the way and did not want to let them pass, and then took out his knife. They didn't even have time to react before he had already cut their throats and was now deftly returning back to Yi-soo. He said with a smile that to kill, you just need to put pressure on the settlement, and this was indeed true. Seeing this, Yi-soo responded positively to Xian, saying that this kid was useful and would still be useful to their organization. However, Xian asked if he was still too young for such serious matters, since the guy was only 17. But Yi-soo said that it was just right, asking in return whether the person Xian was supposed to meet would be of any use to them. Suddenly, one of the bandits they had just managed to escape, but as it turned out, not for long, attacked him. He swung the knife right next to his face, so Yi-soo barely managed to dodge it, moving slightly to the side. Then he grabbed the attacker by the arm, and the characteristic killer instinct appeared in his eyes. He broke the man's wrist, and he, screaming in pain, fell to the ground, while the others looked at them in surprise. But Xian continued to talk to him on the phone, telling him about the person he was supposed to meet. He said that while the commander was in North Korea, he was sent to the Middle East as part of the U.S. Army, and he definitely didn't study English there. He said he met a group of rangers on motorcycles there, but before continuing, he asked if the commander had listened to him. He said he had listened, and Xian continued, saying that among them, there was a capable man named Deadline. He said he was something like an errand boy who would do whatever was asked as long as he was paid well. Isu asked again if this was true, and Xian confirmed it once again, saying that he was ready to do anything for money. Kyung-chun Yisu said that they had to keep moving because today they had to get rid of at least one more of Garang's subsidiary organizations. So they made their first move by destroying their best and strongest subsidiaries. Xuan said that he would start his operation and then join them when he finished, and the commander agreed. He had just finished talking when someone threw an axe in his direction, which almost reached his face. But Isu grabbed the axe with a strong and dexterous movement and moved it aside, protecting his face. He thought that it seemed like these people were faster than he thought, but that wasn't a problem for him and Kyung-chun. The man who threw the axe was very surprised that the boy was able to catch it, because he thought it would take him by surprise. It was Kim Do-hwan, the director of Doki Doki Night, an organization within the Garang group, who asked how they dared to attack Garang. But Isu only told Laska to deal with him, since he was just an amateur, and he, with a cookie in his mouth, already rushed at the man. He missed it by literally a split second because two other men blocked their boss. One of them swung a knife and Kyung-chun dodged, but the blade passed near his mouth, cutting the cookie. This surprised the guy. He said that these guys, it turns out, are masters. It looks like they trained and studied in the army. He asked why people like them were on Garang's side, and the men took a defensive stance. From behind them, Do-hwan's head appeared, bragging that these guys were sent here personally by director Ryu Tae-hyun. Well, plus, the same guys should have already arrived in their decent, because they are not the only smart ones here, so he advised them to return to their headquarters. He said that they had better hurry before Tyson was destroyed to pieces, but Yi-soo was in no hurry to leave his place. He thought that Chief Zhang was directly connected to one sink, and now he dragged Garang into it to increase his chances. Kyung-chun told him to leave those two masters to him, because he would deal with them, and Yi-soo could take care of the director. The guy suddenly started jumping on his feet, saying that there was something that had been interesting to him for a long time, and now he wanted to check it out. He prepared for the attack, thinking that, sure, he was a North Korean spy, but it should work on South Korean masters too. With this thought in mind, he rushed into the attack, already planning the probable actions for its success. The man he was running towards held out a knife to wound the boy, but he hit him on the arm, pushing it to the side. Then he clamped it with his right hand, and in his left he was already twirling his knife, getting ready to strike. It was clear that he would succeed. And so it happened, and the knife passed near the man's throat, who, in surprise, even dropped his weapon. Blood sprayed from his neck, and the other man was already clutching his knife because he realized that the guy in front of him was quite dangerous. He lunged at where Kyung-chun's head had been a second ago, but he ducked, using the wounded bandit's body as cover. In an instant, he found himself next to another man who, like his comrade, did not have time to do anything before he was cut. After finishing with them, the guy turned to Yisu, saying that the road was clear so they should hurry. Yisu was going to help him with the rest, but the boy told him that he could handle it himself, and he could go ahead, Yisu agreed. Du Huang, who was pressed against the wall, involuntarily thought about how it happened that the elite defenders from the Garang group were so easily defeated by some guy. Yisu thanked Kyung-chun and hurried to hide, because he still had things to do that he absolutely had to do. As he ran, he thought about the fact that Chief Zhang was already with Goran, and it happened quite quickly. Taehyun admitted that the boss's guys were not bad, but he asked if they would listen to amateurs like Garang Group. To this, Zhang asked him a counter question, asking why he thought they were professionals. It was all quite obvious, because they simply wouldn't work unless they were paid properly. Therefore, it doesn't matter who orders them. The main thing is that there is decent pay. A guy on a motorcycle rushed towards Isu. In this matter, this guy was a professional among professionals. He had already swung the crowbar he was holding in his free hand. A sizable group of people had already gathered near the building, each of them armed with a bladed weapon. At the same time, a car drove up to them and stopped near the building. Chief Zhang and Ghost were sitting in the car, the latter saying that he was still not used to the fact that they were involved in business groups. He said that he was sure that he had killed Becky Su, asking why he was still alive. But Zhang told him that he should have been convinced of his death and brought the body, then there would definitely be no doubt. He said that if the ghost had done that, none of this would be happening now, but nothing could be changed. The ghost had a strange expression on his face when he heard these words. For some reason, he looked into the distance for a while, without even blinking. Then he seemed to come out of his trance, slamming his fist into his palm, asking why he hadn't actually done that. Suddenly, he burst out laughing, and his eyes seemed to be about to pop out of his eyeballs. He said that he should have done exactly as the boss said. Seeing that he had already gone crazy, Zhang said that they should no longer return to the past, so there was no need to think about it. Meanwhile, the guy gripped the crowbar even tighter and prepared to strike, swinging with all his strength. Considering that he was on a motorcycle and at high speed, the skill of his strike was surprising, because if it weren't for Yisu's knife, he would have already been unconscious. The guy used a crowbar to stop himself. Now Yisu clearly recognized him as Deadline, but he doubted that Xion could talk to him so quickly. Then a terrible realization struck him that if it wasn't Xion, then Chief Zhang had already gotten ahead of them and hired this guy. However, he didn't have time to think about it, because new changes appeared, and the situation became much worse. The Middle East, Afghanistan, is considered the most dangerous war zone that can be found in the desert. Vast wilderness and sand dunes were everywhere here, so to overcome these conditions, the 66th Ranger Battalion created a special task force that rode motorcycles. It was called a Special Group, and it was created by the U.S. Special Operations Command, USSO. One of the Rangers transmitted a signal calling headquarters. He said that they had managed to recover several enemy guns and gunpowder. The problem was, however, that even in those days there were variables. It has always been like this. Such people did not think that they were betraying anyone. They were simply worried about their own safety. Therefore, to survive in the midst of these variables, it is necessary to find a reliable way, a method that can ensure their safety without any risks or harm to them. War always means the death of thousands of people, perhaps the most absurd thing that humanity has come up with in its history. For example, a group of extremists seeking to advance their interests through a series of riots, or greedy corporations that want to exploit these interests to achieve their own goals. Many more examples could have been given, but something else was absolutely clear. This lifestyle was precarious because people by their nature will always strive to gain more power into their own hands, taking care of their own safety. In this world, the strong will always rule over the weak. It was, is, and will be so. So there is no point in changing anything. It was a dangerous war zone where you never knew what you would be greeted with or what you would be sent away with. And if you couldn't cope with all the variables, your end was as inevitable as the cycle of nature. You became a victim in this system. You were eaten by someone who was stronger, and you could no longer do anything about it. Power and authority are not given to everyone. So if someone wanted to get them, he had to go through a rather thorny path. However, if he still managed to overcome it, he became the winner and received the power and knowledge necessary to dominate this world. Sometimes people underestimate others, thinking that they are fools who are not able to think like them. However, when these fools returned, their appearance was as unexpected as the delusions about their failure. And then comes the hour of reckoning, when it becomes clear who is truly the strongest and smartest. It was a simple principle, which, however, for some reason everyone forgot. If you underestimate your enemy, you will pay. It is precisely in such a place, the desert, where not everyone can survive and ensure their safety. The most terrible of the predators was Deadline, who managed to subjugate not only his comrades, but also his enemy. This was a brief description of what Xion had said about him, saying that everyone without exception was afraid of the guy. The roar of his motorcycle could be recognized with your eyes closed, because there was something frightening and terrible about it. It was impossible to hide or run away from him. The victim could only accept the fight, the outcome of which determined her life. Now, such a victim was Yi Su. He knew that meeting with Deadline was dangerous, but he found him first. He was preparing to attack again, gripping the crowbar tighter and adjusting something on his motorcycle. His left hand, holding a crowbar, was aimed at the enemy's weak points. But unfortunately, Yi Su realized this too late. Suddenly, the light emitted by the motorcycle's headlights went out, leaving the two of them alone in almost impenetrable darkness. However, it turned out that the advantage was still on the enemy side, and Yi Su thought that he most likely had adaptation to the darkness. He realized that Deadline had used a clever tactic, first shining the bright headlights on him, and then dimming the lights so that Yi Su's vision would become blurred. Suddenly, quiet steps were heard somewhere near him, and only thanks to this, he managed to wave his knife in that direction and defend himself from the blow. The only problem was that Deadline was hit with a crowbar, and this, as we know, is a fairly strong piece of metal. During the attack with the knife, a piece of the blade broke off and flew off to the side, making his weapon of little use. Moreover, he did not have time to tense his hand in time, so now it hurt a lot from the unexpected tension. Things were getting tense. He didn't know if he would be able to block the enemy's next attacks, so he had to do something about it. Deadline had judged him on how he had managed to defend himself at the last second, but now he was about to attack again. Meanwhile, at the main office and simultaneously the headquarters of Taisan, a battle was also raging between the two organizations. The men from Taisan continued to fight, telling each other not to retreat and to hold the line, defending their organization. But the people from Garang kept coming and coming, not giving them time to rest and gather their strength. The worst part was that the attack happened just when they couldn't contact the director. The men were cutting each other up, waving knives, when suddenly an unfamiliar guy in glasses stepped into the arena. He had a strong build and said he didn't understand Chief Zhang, asking what was wrong with those thugs. They continued to fight, supporting each other not to give up, because that would be the end for the Tayson group. But suddenly, the bespectacled man attacked one of the men, who was fighting hard and encouraging his comrades. The blow was so strong that he even dropped his knife. So hard did they hit him in the jaw. He fell to the floor, unable to stay on his feet, but did not lose consciousness and now simply looked furiously at the new bandit. He looked back at him, saying that they were beyond their capabilities because they were professionals in their field, and those were just a bunch of scum. As if to confirm his words, the men behind him rushed to attack the remaining members of Tayson. Glasses ordered them to kill all these idiots, but suddenly there was a loud bang, as if someone had been thrown to the floor. This turned out to be almost true, as Choi Jung-ho joined the fight and unleashed a heavy blow on one of the Garang. He sighed in annoyance, saying that he just wanted to enjoy his vacation here. But these idiots had stopped him. Putting on gloves with metal inserts, he said that since this was the case, he simply could not help but help. The men from Garang recognized him. He was one of the 9 knives of Ilhak, and therefore incredibly strong. They asked each other what he was doing there. Glasses noticed that his men had begun to retreat involuntarily, and he decided to take a look at what had frightened them so much. Jung-ho also saw the unfamiliar guy, saying that he didn't look like someone from their business. He added that he was sorry that their meeting took place under such circumstances because the guy looked capable. However, today he, Jung-ho, the deputy head of Gudo, Second Knife, was on Taeson's side and fought alongside its members. With these words, he took off his white jacket and now wore a black shirt, indicating his temporary status in Taeson as the head of security. But the guy just chuckled smugly, taking off his glasses, and asked if he wasn't too old for such games. The guy's name was Park Chang-hoon. He was the head of a special forces group, dishonorably discharged for violence and rebellion. In the past, Seoul's most powerful organization, he was a member of it as one of the Nine Knives. In that glorious era, he was Ilhak's main weapon because his strength was known to everyone. He was the pride of the Nine Knives, a man of great potential and his own convictions that were built on moral ambush. And now this man is fighting on the side of Taeson, which in the past was one of the organizations that did not dare to oppose him. The boys from Gorang also could not understand this, but they were overcome with fear and panic because the old man was very dangerous. Then Chung Hong turned to him and said that since those fools did not dare to engage in battle with him, he would do it. Chung Ho, however, said that he almost managed to hurt him, but the guy still lacked good manners. However, he jumped to conclusions, and Chung Hong added more force, breaking through his block and knocked out the big guy. Then he took a stance and began to deliver various blows, which confused Jung Ho a little. Then he stepped back for a second, but only to take a running start, and in the blink of an eye, he was already running towards the old man. He hit him in the stomach, but to his surprise, the big guy turned out to be still quite old, because he completely absorbed his blow. But then Chang Hoon didn't realize it because Jung Ho bent over, pretending that the blow had hit him, so that the guy would lean towards him. But at the last moment, Chang Hong noticed this, and without thinking twice, hit him on the head, ruining the plan to capture himself. Meanwhile, Deadline was already back on his motorcycle, the wheels spinning in place, creating clouds of dust. And Sue wondered if he had broken his arm. He needed to hurry since everything was taking too long. Deadline placed his hand on the handle of the motorcycle, preparing to attack Yi-Soo again. This time he was sure that he would not dodge. The motorcycle roared and he drove straight towards the commander, who, however, remained calm and did not even move from his spot. Deadline lifted the bike onto one wheel. It was a direct attack at speed, which meant it was necessary to aim towards the body to defend itself. He bent down, shortening his distance from the front wheel, and managed to push the motorcycle a little so that the guy almost flew out of the saddle. But the next second, he launched an attack with a crowbar and then managed to stay in the saddle and ride through Yi-Soo. The commander was lucky this time. He remained unharmed, although the attack was very close. However, Deadline had already turned his motorcycle around and was rushing towards him again. He was determined to finish off his victim, as he always had before. The wheels created clouds of dust that obscured Yi-Soo's view, and the motorcyclist's hand was already raised for another blow. Suddenly, at the last moment, he shifted his weight onto the front wheel and turned the motorcycle, maintaining speed. This time, Yi-Soo only managed to move his leg away from the place where the wheel would have crushed it, and he leaned back a little. Then Deadline swung his crowbar. His attack speed increased by the fact that he was swinging from above while sitting on his bike. Of course, Yi-Soo couldn't miss such an attack. He dodged it, but it turned out to be just a feint. Deadline forced him to duck to the side so he could get under the rear wheel of the motorcycle, and then he hit him with that wheel. Yi-Soo's cap even flew off and blood appeared on his face, because this was the first time the guy managed to touch him, which meant he was really capable. Yi-Soo thought that all his judgments and predictions were wrong. Chief Zhang, Garang Group, and now this Deadline. And Soo should have been more cold-blooded and insightful. He needed to observe the enemy and look for his weaknesses. But Deadline continued to attack, once again starting the motorcycle engine. He prepared to attack again, but it was impossible to tell or understand what weak points there might be. But Yi-Soo still tried to assess the situation, as he had been taught in training, and he realized that his rear tire was smoking due to friction. The smoke now completely obscured the view, but not for Deadline, who seemed to feel confident with such visibility. Yi-Soo no longer had a knife, so he took a stance, thinking about where the next attack would be, since his wound was on the right. Variables are called variables because they cannot be predicted or calculated. However, not all variables change the situation for the worse, because sometimes help comes unexpectedly. He heard a familiar voice asking if these were really the methods of professionals, since back then, Yisu wasn't as cool as he thought. Yisu was surprised to see Jin Wong take off his jacket and walk towards him, covering it with his large body. He asked if an amateur like him could join them, and that was another variable. Meanwhile, in Daisan, an equally interesting fight was planned between an amateur and a professional. Park Chung-hoon was stretching his stiff neck, and the men from Daisan watched with surprise and a little fear as he hit Young-ho. The boy turned to him, asking the old man if he was still alive, since the difference in their strength could have been fatal for him. But to his surprise, the big guy remained standing on his feet, and it even seemed that he was now even more terrible than before. This made Chang Hong hurry up, as he didn't understand how such a bandit could have such physical form. He thought that he needed to finish with him quickly. But at that very moment, Young-ho's fist was near his face. He managed to dodge, but was amazed by his speed and reflexes at that age, because the blow could have been decisive for him. Such a fast attack was not suited to his size, so Chang Hong realized that he had to increase the distance between them. He jumped away from the thug, but the latter attacked him again, saying that he had been in a terrible mood lately, because bastards like them tried to interfere in the affairs of their gangs. With these words, he plunged his fist straight into Chang Hong's stomach. He became noticeably nervous, because it seemed that the old man's patience had run out and he was now about to let off some steam. He rushed at him again, and this time Chang Hong had to defend himself. He pulled out a knife, pointing it at the old man. However, this didn't even bother him. He ignored the knife, hitting the guy in the face with all his strength, so hard that the knife fell out and blood appeared. However, that was not the end. He watched in horror as the big guy grabbed his face as if he wanted to break his jaw. Chung-hoon bent over from the intense pain in his stomach. His face also hurt, and Young-ho, who was holding him, asked if he understood everything. He continued to squeeze his face, asking if he really thought he could do anything to them. He started talking again about Il-hak's former strength, but Chang Hong, with the last of his strength, grabbed another knife, intending to cut his hand. However, Young-ho naturally saw this and took the knife with his free hand, saying that the guy turned out not to be very smart. The big guy pulled his knife away and even squeezed it a little. Then Chang Hong noticed with horror that he was wearing Kevlar gloves. The material was very durable and was used for bulletproof vests, and Young-ho only squeezed his face tighter. He threw the boy to the floor, following his fall until he hit his face and blood sprayed everywhere again. He never got up again, lying on the floor, and Young-ho said that it would be better for such professionals not to show themselves at all. He asked how he found the fight and whether it was as easy as he said at the beginning, since he was now lying on the floor unconscious. Meanwhile, Yisu's battle was just beginning, this time with reinforcements in the form of Jin Wong. The big guy from Daesan, noticing that he was holding his hand, asked if he had bruised it or broken it, which would have been even worse. However, the commander said he was fine, saying that Tyson was more important, but Jin Wong replied that there was no need to worry. After all, Tyson was in good hands now, so they should also try. He rolled up his sleeves. Yisu said that the guy in front of them was a real pro, but Jin Wong interrupted him, saying that he was already tired of listening to this record. But he decided to explain later, because now he needed to deal with this impudent motorcyclist. Yisu immediately warned him, saying that it was dangerous to rush at him recklessly, but Jin Wong replied that he was thinking too much. He wrapped his jacket around his hand, saying that he should try to hit at least once first. Deadline didn't seem at all embarrassed by the appearance of another man, because this was just another victim. He rushed towards them again. Jin Wong only dug his heels in further, saying that Director Beck said so. No, Mr. Beck Do-kyung. The motorcycle was rapidly approaching. They were getting ready to hit each other, one with a crowbar and the other with a fist. He thought back to that meeting at the diner when Do-kyung had first said those words, and now he completely shared them. He prepared to attack, swinging his wrapped fist and gathering all his strength for this blow. It hit the motorcycle right in the center of the body, and the impact was so strong that the bike stopped. Deadline clearly didn't expect such force from his new victim. It even made him fly out of the saddle. He managed to group himself in time and land near the motorcycle, whose wheels continued to spin. But Jin Woon didn't give him time to recover and swung his crushing blow again. This time he hit his opponent, who flew back and dropped the crowbar, so now the advantage was on the side of Yisu and Jin Wong. The latter approached the director, saying that someday solving the problem using Baek Do-kyung's method could make him a real Baek Do-kyung. Yisu looked at him with surprise, although he understood what he was trying to tell him, remembering his brother. Jinwoon also knew that the director understood everything perfectly, but he still wanted to remind him of it. If you think about it, it all started back in his childhood. When Yisu was 11 years old, he remembered how he cried then. His brother Do Kyung was always different from him in that he never cried, unlike little Yisu. Then he asked if he hadn't told him that he would beat him up if he cried again, all because the 6th grade boys were bullying him. Although he and his brother were twins in the same age, his older brother was very different from him, the weakling. He was stronger than the other guys and even beat guys who were older and taller than him. He simply had no fear. And he, as a younger brother, did not like this at all, because in comparison to him, he was nobody. His brother had defeated all the bullies who bullied Yisu, and although it was the right thing to do, Yisu felt that he was losing to him in everything. Nothing changed when they entered school, and literally the next day, Do Kyung started another fight. They were in the same class, but Yisu was more focused on his studies while his brother kept getting himself into trouble. They were 15 years old then. Their views on life were already very different, but they still worried about each other. The onlookers from his class were glued to the windows, watching his brother, because he always fought bravely and to the last. They saw other guys who had something broken or bandaged, and then they all noticed Baek Do-kyung. Over the course of 4 years, he became even stronger, and even then, his image had something to do with the ability to gather people around him. He stood in front of other guys who, apparently, were going to confront him and his guys. Suddenly, another guy appeared and asked why only 3 of them came, because now they made him look like a hooligan. He was a high school student, and he clearly knew how to fight well, and he was now heading straight for Daegun. One of those who watched the scene from the classroom said that it must be a martial arts master. He really did have a well-trained body. He was already on par with Do-kyung and was a head taller than him. He said that he gave his friends advice, but apparently the guys didn't listen to him and paid the price. However, Do-kyung was not at all affected by this and called the boy by name, asking if he hadn't graduated from high school yet. He asked again why the hell he came here then, and whether he really hadn't learned anything after graduation. His last words were to tell them to follow him, as he didn't want to start a fight in the middle of the school. Everyone who was near them at that moment watched their conversation with surprise, but no one intervened. One of the guys who was on Do-kyung's side, and who had already been beaten up by this high school student, wanted to go too. But Do-kyung raised his hand, stopping him, saying that he would go alone. And besides, in this state, the guy would only get in the way. At that moment, Yisu approached the window, also curious about who his brother was going to fight this time. They walked behind the school so no one saw Do-kyung suddenly drop to his knees, his head bowed to the ground. He apologized to the senior student, saying that he had acted thoughtlessly under the influence of the atmosphere. The guy didn't expect such a turn of events because he was already prepared to have a good fight with this impudent fellow. But Do-kyung continued, saying that he respected him so much and that he heard that he went to Jaewon High School, where he probably also kept everyone in fear. The guy was a little perplexed because he certainly didn't expect compliments, especially from this kid. But in the end, he liked his humility. He said that at first he thought of making a cripple out of him, but now he changed his mind. He said that Do-kyung made him laugh, so he would leave him alive and hurt his friends instead. He asked the guy how he felt about this deal, but Do-kyung was already looking at him completely differently and stopped bowing. Clenching his pen in his fist, he replied that this wouldn't do and that he should have hit the high school student in the head once. The guy naturally didn't understand what he was talking about, but the next moment Do-kyung jumped on his foot, sticking his pen into his boot. It felt like a nail had gone through his leg, and he screamed in pain, clutching at it. Meanwhile, Do-kyung took advantage of his lack of concentration and kicked him in the face. He said that his classmate Ji-hoon delivered newspapers every morning, and at first he, Do-kyung, laughed because it was terribly old-fashioned. But one day this high school boy beat him up for the same reason, and now he was angry because Ji-hoon was a good guy. One of those who came to watch their leader fight attacked him, asking what kind of nonsense he was just telling. Do-kyung caught his punch with a bent elbow and asked if the seniors were having too much fun lately. He added that each of them probably had brothers and sisters who also went to elementary school. So why didn't that stop them? Why did they still continue to bully those who were weaker and younger? He pressed on the sore spot and the boy fell down, holding his arm, while the others also pounced on Do-kyung. 2 of them grabbed him under the arms and the third swung to hit him. However, even in this position, Do-kyung was able to dodge, throwing his head back as far as possible, and with his free hand, he was already reaching for the guy. He grabbed him by the hair, saying that he remembered something and forgot to tell him earlier. One of those holding him was surprised that he could still move, because that meant he was stronger. He hit the guy he was holding in the face with his head, but that hurt him too. He was still being held, and the boys decided to attack together, since he didn't have a chance against a combined attack. But Do-kyung, instead of answering, showed them the middle finger, saying that if they touched him or his friends again, they were dead. And Soo hated his brother, who ran ahead and did not look where he was going, and he hated him for the things he did. But he also regretted the decisions he had not made himself, and there were quite a few of them. That is why he then came to his brother's aid, just as he had once helped him. And Soo envied his brother and wanted to become like him, not in appearance but in character, because his was much better. After all, they were brothers, so no matter what difficulties were on their way, together they could always overcome them. Do-kyung then asked him what he was doing here, to which Yi-soo responded in a slightly strange way. He showed him his fists, saying that he was always studying so damn much, but still couldn't understand anything. Do-kyung understood everything and also put his fist up, after which they dealt with the older guys together. As they were leaving, Do-kyung asked Yi-soo what he wanted to be when he graduated, but he said he didn't know yet. And now he already knew for sure, because in fact he had answered this question a long time ago. He wanted to become like Baek Do-kyung, his brother. The deadline was on the ground, the motorcycle was lying to the side. The same was with the crowbar, which meant victory was Taeson's. But Yi-soo continued to think about his brother. He thought that little by little he was beginning to become like him. However, this was not the case. They were completely different people, even though they looked similar to each other. He said he never knew what his brother was really like, even though he lived side by side with him for almost his entire life. It seemed to him that he could never become like him, no matter how hard he tried and no matter what efforts he made. Then Jin-woon approached him and said that he could help in this matter. He said that he would tell him what kind of person Baek Do-kyung really was. He then knelt before Yi-soo, saying that he would personally raise him to the pedestal where his brother once shone. Jung-ho clapped his gloves to shake off the mixture of blood and dust from the fight with the Garang thugs. He put one hand behind the other elbow, doing warm-ups and saying that he had enough of these fights. It was time to retire. But then he remembered his director from Ilhak, who would lose the main weapon of his organization if he left. He wondered whether it was worth making such a radical decision, since it was still too early for him to retire. He then turned to the men who were still left, telling them to hurry up, as he still had things to do. He said they were so young but so slow, but at that moment the ghost appeared behind him. Meanwhile, Deadline had also recovered from Jin-woong's blow, which was quite a clear indication of his strength. He walked over to the motorcycle, getting ready to mount again, and Jin-woong gave him credit, saying that he was a tough nut to crack. He asked Yi-soo who this guy was, but the commander didn't know anything about him either, except that he served in the U.S. Army. Their conversation was interrupted by Deadline himself, who pointed to the broken glass of his headlight, asking what the big guy was going to do with it now. But the big guy was even more surprised by the fact that the guy spoke Korean, since he didn't even have a particular accent. Hearing no answer to his question, he twisted the crowbar like the butterfly knife that Kyung-chun had. He was already back on his motorcycle, getting ready to run into them again, this time carrying out an attack. However, Jin-woon only moved a little away from the place where he had flown into last time, and once again firmly planted his feet on the ground. He clenched his fist and said that since that was the case, there was no need to hold back. He hadn't fought in such a state for a long time. Deadline was about to step on the gas when he suddenly heard his phone vibrate in the side pocket of his jacket. This made him stop, and although his eyes were hidden behind his helmet, they widened a little. He had an old push-button phone, but it was enough for him. The vibration meant a new text message, and he opened the message. It stated that Garang's organization had transferred 20,000 won as a down payment to his account, and the rest would come once he completed the task. Below, they sent him the necessary address, and he started his motorcycle to begin carrying out his new task. He turned the motorcycle around, and Yi-soo and Jin-woong stood and watched in surprise as their opponent left the scene of the battle. Finally, Deadline pointed his finger at Jin-woong, saying that he remembered the bastard who broke the headlight. With these words, the motorcycle roared to life, and Deadline, looking at them one last time, rode away. Jin-woong said that he thought he would fight after such words, but Yi-soo replied that his work here was probably already over. Or there was another reason. He received a bigger order because whoever paid more ruled over people like him. Meanwhile, silence fell over the main office of Tayson, where a battle broke out between the second knife Choi Young-ho and the ghost assassin. The rest of the men simply watched in silence as they fought, neither Gorang nor Tyson daring to intervene in their battle. Everyone had different experiences in the organization, but it was rare to see such a battle. Even the most experienced agents understood this, including Yang Soo-bin, who even postponed his vacation. There were traces of blood from various men on Young-ho's glove, and now he was about to leave the mark of another professional on it. He delivered a powerful uppercut to the ghost, and it seemed like he would never get up after that. But the old man found this guy strange and alarming because he swung the knife masterfully, even managing to hit him a couple of times. To finish him off, it was necessary to choose the right moment and finish everything in one fell swoop. However, the ghost had his own opinion on this matter. He looked at him with his furious gaze, saying that Grandpa would not defeat him like that. Seeing his face, Jin-woon tensed up because the guy didn't show any fear at all, and this was alarming. He managed to notice how the enemy transferred his weight to his left leg, which meant he was preparing to attack. It was this that allowed him to put his hands out in defense, which saved him from damage to his internal organs. The enemy's speed was astonishing, and Young-ho barely managed to avoid the fatal blow, but his glove was cut. He began to analyze the enemy, because as soon as he prepared to reflect his attack, he changed his trajectory. Now he realized that he had underestimated the guy, and now it was not about protection that he should worry about. In front of him stood a real killer, who was a master of knife skills and who also seemed to have mental problems. As if to confirm this, the ghost suddenly burst out laughing, saying that Baek Yi-soo had looked at him with the same expression. Young-ho swung again, but the blow missed. The guy moved incredibly fast, not allowing himself to be caught. He went behind the old man, saying that this wouldn't do and that he needed to move faster if he wanted to get to him. He pounced on him from behind, spinning his karambit for a fatal attack, intending to finish the big guy off. But Jung-ho put out his hand, catching his knife, even though it was incredibly sharp and easily cut even the special material. But the man believed that he would not break as long as he protected something important. He hit his opponent again. However, the ghost grabbed his arm by the elbow, looking at him in bewilderment, saying that Grandpa was pathetic if this was all he could do. Suddenly, he threw his head back, still laughing, and pressed on the joint of his hand, almost breaking the bone. Jung-ho felt it clearly, but he no longer had the strength to do anything to free himself. The ghost attacked again, this time jumping at him, knee out to strike him in the head. However, at the last second, a signal sounded for all employees to retreat, and this forced him to stop. He asked why they were retreating now that Tyson was almost defeated, but the signal only repeated itself again. Those who remained from Garang began to retreat little by little, and only the ghost remained in place. Chung Hong approached him, saying that the thugs from the top of Garang had changed their plans, so there was an order to retreat. He said it seemed like it was part of a new plan, and they seemed to have a role to play too. But the ghost was not satisfied with this explanation. He grabbed Chung Hong by the hair, asking if they would really obey the government. He said he was playing with fire by shifting back and forth between his rulers. He snatched the radio from his pocket, telling the person on the other end that the fun was just beginning, and this time he had to finish off Tayson. But the chief told him to stop fooling around and follow the order to retreat. Chung explained that their all-powerful CEO Tae-hyun claimed to have some idea. It was already dawn when Yi-soo and Jin-woong arrived at Tayson's office, and they immediately saw traces of a fight outside the building. Jin-woong saw Young-ho's bandaged arm and ran up to him, asking who could have caused him such injuries. Tae-hyun told Chief Jung his idea, saying that in such cases it was necessary to act harshly. Laska had no luck tying his tie and kept chewing on his cookie, asking Shiona for help with this accessory. He just sighed loudly, telling the guy to come to him, and thought to himself that, apparently, they didn't teach this in North Korea. The guy came up to me and said he had never worn a suit before, because his signature accessory was his signature butterfly knife. While Shion was tying his tie, Boris walked over to the table, picking up a large bread knife, and Shion had to stop him too. All in all, the guy had to keep an eye on every new member of their organization, and it was tiring. Jinwoong and Young-ho didn't help him much with this, so all responsibility for order in the group fell on him. But it wasn't always like this, because when the director came, order was restored on its own, and that's how it was this time. Isu entered the room with Sue. They were also in full dress, and he was pleased with the general mood. He suggested that from now on they should talk like real bandits, since they were now bandits too. He sat down in the chair, spreading his legs just as his brother had done when he began the conversation, and asked what would be the best way to begin. Young Ho stood by the car, asking if Jin Wong was really going to send him away like that after everything he had done for them. To which Jin Wong replied that he hadn't driven him away, since he could have left at any time. But Young Ho said that he was just joking and was already wanting to come back himself. Then Jin Wong decided to ask him if he would like to stay in Decent a little longer, at least during his recovery period. But he only put his hand on his shoulder, saying that he understood what he was getting at, but he still couldn't do that. He said that he actually realized something when he saw how Tyson had transformed, and that was just the beginning. Watching the new members and how their organization now worked, he began to think about his own. He said that this was not the end, and one day Ilhak too would rise from his knees, returning to his former glory. That's why he had to come back. Having said this, he smiled, saying that his vacation was over. Now it was time to return home to his organization, where the guys were probably already waiting for him. Meanwhile, at the Nine Knives headquarters, the battle had also ended, and now Hunim was kneeling, unable to continue it. He asked those who attacked them if they really thought that Ilhak would surrender so easily, since they were the best of the best. However, so far, everything indicated the opposite, because all of Gudo's members lay defeated on the floor. Only Hyun-nim remained, perplexed, asking who had sent them, since they had dealt with Gudo, meaning they were very strong. It was Ghost and Deadline, and destroying Ilhak's main trump card was their new task. They were about to leave when suddenly they were pushed aside by Tai Hyun, who had also arrived at the scene to see everything with his own eyes. He turned to Hyun-nim, saying that he had aged quite a bit since their last meeting and now looked like an old man. It all started with Seung-min sitting in his office, calculating the revenue for the last month, which turned out to be small. He said there were more in the last month, and Hyun-nim, who gave him the report, apologized. But the director said that he shouldn't have, because it was also his fault, but what was more important was how they felt. One of them had a broken arm, the other a broken leg, but neither of them complained much about their injuries. The man with the broken leg, on top of everything else, was suddenly seized by a cramp and grabbed his leg. Seung-min said that they had all worked hard, and as someone who couldn't fight at all, he was glad that they were still alive. He was still speaking when suddenly some strange sounds were heard, and one of the knives suggested going and checking out the situation. When he asked the guards what the sound was, they replied that it sounded like the roar of a motorcycle, even though they were on the third floor. The sound came from the landing, where the guards were looking at the unexpected guest in surprise. Of course, it was Deadline who rushed towards them on his motorcycle, and in the blink of an eye, the men were already lying on the ground. The others who had come to see what all the noise was about now also looked at the motorcyclist with horror. But he didn't waste any time and knocked down the doors to Ilhak's main office, where the Knives' headquarters were located, with the front wheel. They watched in amazement as the door fragments flew apart in all directions, unable to do anything. Deadline drove into the room at high speed, waving his crowbar in all directions, and Borscht was overcome with fear. Because of this, they could not move, continuing to stand in place. And the next moment, one of them had his face cut by a crowbar. The poor guy even threw his head back. Blood spurted from his mouth, but he, like the others, did not think of retreating. The Knives were not caught off guard. After all, they had been through countless battles. Just like professional boxers who are always ready for anything, they had no doubts about their duty. Using their experience and skills, they boldly engage in combat with any enemy to protect their organization. However, in this case, a previously unseen enemy entered the ring, whose appearance they could not have predicted. He was like a knight on horseback, all in heavy armor, against their fists and pride. This discovery left the Knives a little confused, as they had never fought such an opponent before, and this allowed Deadline to discover their weak spot, where he directed all his subsequent attacks. A metal crowbar against human bone is like a knight's sword against a boxer's fists. Even though they were professionals, they couldn't fight against something like that, especially since they had wounds from the previous battle. And after Deadline came other members of the Garong group, who were also supposed to participate in the destruction of Gudo. Now it was no longer a fair fight, because the enemy was superior in numbers and was armed. Then Knives saw the Garang organization's badge on the men's jackets and told them to hold their horses. Hyun-nim shouted that in that case it was a direct violation of their agreement, asking if they really wanted to turn the entire committee against themselves. But the men didn't seem to understand what he was talking about. One of them ordered to deal with this old fool. With all their strength, all the knives fought for their organization, forgetting about past injuries and wounds. Choi Kwang Pao, the seventh knife, was furious, asking who these freaks dared to bare their teeth at. However, his leg was dislocated, and Hyun Nim saw that it had not yet healed, which meant they would not be able to fight for long. Guan Pao was a pretty strong knife, but in his current state he couldn't fight to his full potential, so Hyunim decided to take on the guy on the bike. It was the least he could do, and Deadline had already lifted the wheel, intending to run it over the head of one of the knives. The man's name was Sun Mon, and Hyunim managed to pull him away at the last moment, avoiding being hit by a wheel. He told him to protect the master, and he himself would detain these bandits. But Song Min replied that he could not cope alone. Then the man named John Tok Bae, Ilhak's eighth knife, whom Deadline had first knocked out, suddenly stood up again, saying that he would help too. He said that together with Hyung Nim, they could teach that idiot on the motorcycle a lesson. This surprised Deadline a little, who clearly didn't expect him to get up after being hit on the head with a crowbar. He was distracted by it, and this gave Hyun Nim the opportunity to attack him when he was defenseless. He told director Lee Sung-min not to worry about them and to escape, because it was dangerous here, and they wouldn't be able to hold them off for long. Guan Pao fought with the rest of the Garang members who arrived as reinforcements, and so far he was doing a good job of stopping them. Sun Mun said he was counting on him, leading the director out of the room, who protested, saying he didn't want them to be killed here. But Guan Pao told him not to worry, as he would catch up with them later. After all, they were Ilhak's 9 knives. Sun Mun walked out to the car with the director and opened the doors, telling him to get in, but he was still leaning on it, saying that they should help the others. But Sun Mun replied that Garang had begun to act, so they were now in danger and it would be best to retreat. Director Lee protested again, saying that there was no retreat, but he interrupted him, saying that if he died, they would lose everything they had fought for. Then Shung Min asked if they really wanted him to live no matter what, and were even willing to sacrifice their lives for that. Even if everyone else died, their battle would not have been in vain, because they knew what they were getting into. That was the backstory of their fight, and now Tai Hyun stood in front of Hyung Nim, saying that it was a rather sad end for the 9 knives. He noticed that their boss was nowhere to be seen and questioned him about it, asking if he had abandoned them. Sun Min was indeed riding in the car. His organization was left behind, and with it its loyal members. He sat there in a depressed mood, wondering what the point would be if only he, the director, survived. He was overcome with regret because he had done everything he could to help Ilhak rise from the ashes, but in the end, he had only ruined him completely. Sun Mon wanted to say that the master was mistaken, but he interrupted him, telling him not to call him that. In despair, he asked himself how much longer he would remain the young master and when he would become Ilhak's real boss. Seeing that he was not in the best mood, Sun Mun said that this was not what he meant. He was about to continue and add a few words of encouragement when suddenly a motorcycle jumped out onto the road. It was Deadline who had foreseen their retreat and had even placed spikes on the road to prevent them from passing. Sun Mun noticed them in time, but it was impossible to get around such an obstacle, so he was forced to turn the car around. On top of all this, the weather conditions were compounded by the fact that it was raining heavily outside, which only made it more difficult to get around. Luckily, the car was stopped at the last moment, and Shung Min opened the door and stepped outside. He asked what it was, but at that moment Sun Mon got out of the car and said that he would go on without him. As he closed the door, he said that the director still had a lot to do, but he believed in him and that he could handle it. He walked up to him and shielded him from the rain with his hand, saying that they all believed in him because he had already shown that he was worthy of being called their boss. Lee Sun-mong looked at him like a father would look at a child who was about to leave him and begin adulthood. He took his face in his hand, saying that there was something else that he should not forget and always remember. Sun Min knew where to run. His suit was completely wet from the rain, but he didn't care at all. The last words Sun Mon said to him back then were a reminder that he was their boss, and they, the Knives of Ilhak, would always be his support. He couldn't run any further and fell to his knees in the middle of the sidewalk as the rain continued to spit on his unprotected back. Passers-by walked by and looked back at him, but he didn't even pay attention because it wasn't his own image that he should be uniting about now. He thought that no matter how pathetic the situation the organization was in might seem, he is Ilhak's CEO, and is solely responsible for her well-being. Then Sun Man told him that there was nothing the knives couldn't do for him, so he thought he should repay them in kind. There was only one place he could think of where he could run for help, and now he was standing at the entrance to the Taisen group. Jinwoo, Yisu, and Young Ho looked in surprise at the guy who didn't even look like the director anymore. Chung Ho recognized his master with horror and rushed to him, asking what had happened to him. Buck Yisu also asked for an explanation, arguing that his condition was indescribable. Then the fateful moment came for Shungmin. However, after thinking for a while, he still overcame himself and began to speak at breakneck speed. He said he had to trust Tyson. No. He begged them to help him save Ilhak and the Nine Knives. He knelt down, thinking that he would even lie at their feet if necessary until they agreed to help him. Suddenly, he couldn't see where he stepped and his foot started to move. But someone grabbed him by the shoulders. It was Baek Yi-soo. He said that he almost fell and suggested that they go inside where they could discuss everything, since the director was soaking wet. Hearing these words and realizing that Taesun was agreeing to help, he looked at Yi-soo, addressing him as Do-kyung. He said that he himself was fine, but the knives from Gudo needed it more, since Garang had attacked them half an hour ago. Young-ho and Jin-won looked at him in surprise, and Yi-soo asked him to tell everything more slowly, since nothing was clear yet. Of course, this is sarcasm. He said that they were just discussing something interesting, but could not resolve one issue. He explained by saying that they were going to destroy the committee, but they didn't know the best way to start. From Cheon-woon or from HHS, maybe it would have been better to start with Garang Group, since they were connected with Ilhak. He said this with a characteristic, furious look in his eyes because this was his new plan. The hospital had good conditions for all patients, but special wards were reserved for those like him. Sue checked the medicine that was attached to the IV. It was important to her that everything worked well. She looked at the person she cared about. This person meant much more to her than an ordinary boss. Lying on the bed was Baek Do-kyung, who had been hospitalized in hopes of being saved after his severe injuries. But he had fallen into a coma and had never woken up since. Sun Min recalled his childhood, which took place in a rather unusual place because he was not an ordinary child. At that time, the head of Ilhak was Lee Seung-han, who was the highest point in Seoul, and at that moment he decided to light a cigarette. Then little Lee Seung-min approached him and asked if the old man had smoked again, and he began to wave his hand and hide the cigarette. He was only 8 years old then, the successor to Lee Seong-hak, and he pointed a sword at his grandfather, saying that he had ordered no one to smoke there. The grandfather decided to play along, saying that he was scared and promised not to smoke anymore if the boy hid the weapon. He asked who taught his grandson such words, and Seung-min said that his uncle Young-ho taught him this. The boy said that Uncle Young-ho was an excellent knife fighter and asked if his grandfather could fight like that too. The old man replied that he couldn't do that, but Seung-min didn't believe him, saying that he was the best in Seoul, and he started pulling him by the hand to show his skills. The boy said that his grandfather was not the best of the best back then, and he replied that it was not necessary to have superiority in combat for that to happen. He became serious and said that all you need to do is have strength of spirit and not fall on your knees before anyone. Little Sun Min did not immediately understand these words, or rather, he did not understand them at all. He told his grandfather that he should have admitted right away that he was a weakling, but he only smiled in response. This was the story of the creation of Ilhak, which was founded by Chairman Lee Seung-hak in Central Seoul. And now, as Seung-min lay in the Tyson headquarters, it all seemed like just a dream to him. He stood up and Young-ho immediately asked if he was okay, and Seung-min replied that he was fine and there was no need to worry. Returning to his memories, he thought that, like any dream, this one had to end sooner or later. He said that Ilhak fell, tears welled up in his eyes, and Young-ho's face became such that it was even pitiful to look at. Then Yisu and Jin-won entered the room, and the director of Daesan sat down on the sofa next to Seung-min, seeing that he was in a bad mood. He asked how he was feeling while getting out the tea service. Instead of his boss, Chung-ho answered, saying that thanks to Taesan, he was recovering rapidly. And Sue said that it wasn't very noticeable yet, but they could stay here as long as they needed and have a good rest. Young-ho replied that they were just helping each other, to which Yi-soo said that was exactly what he was thinking about. He asked if Ilhak could support them, and Young-ho immediately rushed to reassure him, but was interrupted. Yi-soo said that he appreciated his nobility, but now he was asking the director of their organization. He poured tea into a beautiful cup, then smiled and asked if Mr. Choi Young-ho was the boss now. This puzzled the old man a little, but Shung Min asked him to wait outside, as he himself had something to discuss with director Do Kyung. Jin Woon offered to accompany him, even though he saw how sadly he left the room where the fate of his organization was now being decided. After they left, Shung Min turned to Yi Su, saying that before discussing something, he wanted to ask a question. He asked if Baek Yi Su was the real head of D-san, calling him by name. He also wanted to know where Mr. Baek Do-kyung was now, but Yi Su interrupted him by placing his cup of tea on the table. He said that in front of others he called him Do-gyung and had not yet revealed his identity even to Young-ho, but there was something he did not understand. He said that he, Shung-min, should be scared because they were facing something they couldn't handle. And if that's the case, then they should still be scared, not asking stupid questions. Hearing this answer, Shung-min thought that he had gone too far, because it seemed like this topic was a sore point for brother Do-kyung. Right now, they need to be as nice to Taesin as possible, so he said it really didn't matter. He asked if Yi Su was going to work with Ilhak, but he replied that there was no point since he was too weak now. Then Shung-min rephrased the question, asking if they could help them, since he needed to know the answer to this. But Yi Su decided to act tough, saying that he did not ask for his opinion, but rather wanted to know how Ilhak could be of use to them. Sun Min thought for a moment, and then said that they were going to destroy Garang and the entire committee. But would they have enough strength? He continued by saying that Ilhak was a sister organization of the committee, but despite this, Garang attacked them. So if he, as Ilhak's director, reports this to the committee, Garang will pay the fine for violating the terms of the contract. Sunmin said that the current Ilhak might be weak, but the legitimacy of their actions still remain. However, Yisu interrupted him, saying that this was not what he meant, because Ilhak's main problem was Mr. Shungmin himself. In other words, he was a weakling. He asked how they were supposed to take them seriously if the director of the organization was on his own. The HHS office was located in the Ganjem district, and Tai Hyun had already given it a thumbs up, calling it a swanky place. He was sitting in the office of HHS chairman Han Hai-sung, who asked him how he was going to clean up the mess he had made. He didn't understand why his organization attacked Ilhak, since they were both members of the General Assembly. However, Tai Hyun only chuckled, replying that he did it because he wanted to, since ever since childhood he did things first and thought later. But Hai-sung didn't share his enthusiasm, saying that he wouldn't take his side, but Tai Hyun simply told him to wait. Hae-sung replied that the main thing was not to anger Seung-min, but Tai Hyun just laughed, saying that he didn't yet know where the next meeting would be. The place was chosen especially for the young master. It was the house of his grandfather, Lee Seong-hak. Seung-min also found out about this and became angry, because it was too much and Tai Hyun had gone too far. He walked to his grandfather's house, and the men from Garang joked that he was just taking a stroll there, since the place was familiar to him. He continued walking amidst mocking laughter. Some even recognized him as the director, but that didn't stop them. He remembered the words that Yisu had told him back then. He had said that without the Ilhak knives, he was just the heir to a fallen organization. Then he looked closely at the men and realized that they weren't even from Garang. He had to prove something himself. He had to prove himself that he was worthy of being called the head of Ilhak. And at that moment, a cigarette butt was thrown at him. He realized that he had to follow the example of the men of the Nine Knives and do everything in his power to achieve this. Garang's immediate supervisor came out to them and said that a closed meeting was currently taking place. Only the heads of the 4 largest organizations were allowed to attend. But Seung-min interrupted him, telling him to get out of the way. At first, the man didn't understand that he was being disobeyed, but Seung-min yelled at him to move his ass and get out of here, and he pounced on him. The rest stood and looked in surprise at what was happening at the front entrance, but no one dared to intervene. Seung-min managed to knock out the big guy because he caught him off guard, but he still had to fight today. Another guard was already rushing towards him with a wooden stick, asking what this idiot was doing here. He hit him on the head with a stick, and Seung-min didn't even have time to put his hands up to defend himself, because he had never fought before. But he remembered his grandfather's words, who said that it was no big deal if a guy didn't know how to fight. The main thing is that he must be strong in spirit and never fall on his knees before others, no matter how strong the enemy was. Now that Seung-min finally understood his words, as they accurately reflected his situation, he decided to listen to his grandfather. Even though the man hit him, he was still able to fight to the end and grabbed him by the throat. His gaze spoke for him. An incredible strength appeared from somewhere, and he felt that he would not yield to anyone else. With these thoughts, he hit his head on the man's nose. But another one had already appeared from the room, this one with a knife. Luckily, one of the workers noticed this, who was actually none other than Xion. He put his hand on the man's shoulder, saying that this was beyond all bounds because it was wrong. And then he hit him, and he fell, dropping his knife, which Xion successfully confiscated for the benefit of the organization. Taking off his cap, he said that freaks like him should know their place and not get involved in other people's squabbles. After all, there was a generally accepted rule that only bosses could enter, and right now they were holding one of them back. 3 of them had already gathered. Ilhak and Taesan were still missing, but Tae-hyun suggested starting the meeting already. However, the others asked whether it would not have been better to wait for Director Lee from Ilhak, since the conversation was supposed to be about him. It was clear that Tae-hyun could barely contain his laughter when Sung-min's name was mentioned, and he asked if he really hadn't been invited. He added that he didn't think he would have the courage to come here, even though he was a victim. However, the next moment, Sung-min entered the room, his appearance completely inconsistent with his status. But this worried him. There was blood on his hands, and the members of the General Assembly looked at him in surprise. Tae-hyun looked especially puzzled. Sun-min addressed him, calling him a bastard who apparently didn't know one rule. He looked at him in surprise, not expecting this from Director Ilhak, and he held a cigarette in his mouth. Sun-min continued, pointing directly at her and saying that smoking was prohibited in this house. He walked up to him and took the cigarette right out of his mouth, and then said that he would answer him what he had once answered the owner of this house. He said that if he caught him here with a cigarette again, he would kill him on the spot, and his look confirmed his words. During the dark times, Ilhak made the rules, and Lee Seong-hak, the highest point in Seoul, enforced them. He dreamed of entering the political arena, but nothing came of it, and his dream remained unfulfilled until his death. Eventually, Ilhak began to disintegrate, with everyone desperately fighting for control of the weakened organization. A war broke out between the Nine Knives of Ilhak and other capital factions. The criminal community had unleashed a bloody massacre in Seoul, but it was soon time for a change. Lee Seung-hak, tired of watching the situation get worse day by day, made a decision. The decision ended the feud between the organizations, but it proved difficult. It consisted of dividing the criminal world into spheres of influence and appointing leaders of 4 groups. This is how a committee of 4 major organizations emerged, whose roots stretch back to Ilhak. Now, Ryu Tae-hyun, disregarding Chairman Lee Seung-hak's wishes, violated the committee's agreement and attacked Ilhak. The girl from the meeting told him to work hard to give a clear justification for his actions. Otherwise, Garang would become a common enemy of the entire committee. But Tae-hyun didn't take her words seriously, saying that she couldn't decide anything for everyone here. He then advised her to watch her words, otherwise they would be missing another participant at the next meeting. The girl was about to stand up, asking how he dared to say such a thing, but at that moment, Sung-min walked in. This was something they had talked about before, but now he was already in a meeting, and Tae-hyun even became a little tense. Meanwhile, Sun-min took the cigarette from him and sat down in his place, starting the conversation with a reprimand for the organization. He asked if this was some kind of kennel, and if not, then why were there so many mongrels there, all looking like they wanted to fight? Suddenly, Tae-hyun laughed, but it was an angry laugh. He swept all the dishes off his side of the table, asking when he had managed to become so bold. He said that Sung-min was finally acting like a man, asking if the realization that his days were numbered had changed him so much. And Sung-min just smiled strangely, saying that thanks to him, he came to his senses after his head was almost smashed. Meanwhile, the other council members demanded an explanation from Tae-hyun, but Sung-min said that he would explain everything himself. He said that they knew that Garang had attacked Ilhak, and that they had just tried to attack him again. Garang broke the rule prohibiting committee members from attacking each other and took Ilhak's property for himself. Based on this, he, as the director of Ilhak, asked to exclude Garang from the committee, depriving him of all rights. He asked Tae-hyun if he had any objections, but he replied in the negative, saying that he had indeed screwed up. But then he continued, saying that Sung-min had mixed something up. Because wasn't Ilhak the one who spat on the agreement first? He pulled out a photo of the moment of the deal with Taesan, saying that the 2 organizations had clearly become closer recently. And then he suddenly accused him, saying that this is how he set Taesan on them, who then left their committee. However, Sung-min said that he was only transferring files for synchronization, and that it had nothing to do with Garang. But Tae-hyun also did not back down, saying that in the past there was a squabble between Garang and Deason over the Hanam district. He continued by saying that Shungmin decided this was his chance, and a little later several of their groups were ambushed. It turned out that Ilhak had used connections outside the committee to organize the raid on Garang, which meant that they had started it first. He asked Shungmin if he had said everything correctly or if he had made a mistake somewhere, because he understood that he could no longer get out of it. After all, he understood that he wouldn't dare show the organization's files to everyone present. He then decided to make his position clear, saying that he wanted to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. At that moment, as if on cue, men in black suits from the Garang group emerged from the side where he was sitting. Tae-hyun said he believes Ilhak's leader, Lee Sung-min, should be held responsible for violating the agreement. He continued by saying that he also insisted on the dissolution of this senseless committee, and everyone present was surprised. And Su foresaw this yesterday, saying that Garang would demand that the committee be abolished, since it serves as a support for Ilhak. Sungmin said that there was no point in him going to the meeting then, but Yi-soo replied that he had to prove who was boss. At this meeting, he needed to show that he was worthy of being called the head of Ilhak. When Tae-hyun finished his speech, the others began to express dissatisfaction, but Sungmin only closed his eyes. He said that he didn't care about Garang's threats at all, and if Tae-hyun didn't want to be a member of the committee, let him do what he wanted. HHS Director Hae-sung said Sungmin was being unreasonable, adding that he should have gotten on his knees and begged for help. Then Sungmi said that it was now obvious that Garang and HHS were in sync, since Hae-sung was supporting Garang. Then a girl intervened in the conversation and said that the guys were making a mistake by starting a war in this way. She put on her glasses and snapped her fingers, and someone's shadow and a hand holding a machete appeared behind her. She said that they could continue to talk nonsense, but they should keep in mind that she would definitely take one of their heads with her. Looking at her people, Sungmin thought that these were the same infamous Baekjung Chunun, but they seemed to be in China. Tae-hyun ignored her gesture, slamming his hand on the table and telling Sungmin that this wasn't something he should worry about. He stood up from his seat and walked over to him, then sat down on the edge of the table, saying that he had other problems at the moment. After all, he no longer had the 9 knives, which meant he couldn't escape anywhere now. Tae-hyun leaned towards him and asked if he really thought he would grab all the files for himself and not share them with anyone. Sun-min, to his surprise, simply agreed, saying that he was right, he really wasn't able to carry everything. As he spoke, footsteps were heard, which could only mean one thing. The last member of the committee had arrived. The guards who stood at the entrance could not stop him, because he had the right to be present. When he was already at the door, Isu stopped for a moment and called out Ryu Tae-hyun, mimicking his name. He entered accompanied by Jin-woon and Young-ho, saying that he didn't mind playing with Garang and Tae-hyun himself. Then he saw the big picture of the situation and continued to talk mockingly about the stoppage, which was only getting worse. He asked if he had interfered with the 2 directors' decision on serious issues, adding that he also wanted to join them. Tae-hyun was perplexed and asked if it wasn't Do-kyung himself who said that he didn't want to have anything to do with the committee. And Soo answered him, what a fool he was, because the committee and the agreement were nothing, saying that Tae-hyun himself thought the same. Tae-hyun understood why Sung-min didn't speak out in favor of preserving the committee, saying that he even felt a little hurt by how close they had become. Isu confirmed his words, saying that everything was correct, because after all, Sung-min was their chairman. While everyone was surprised, he continued, they say that Tae-sin shares the beliefs of Ilhak's previous prejudice. Therefore, they will support Ilhak and nominate Lee Sung-min as the next chairman. So he told Tae-hyun to get ready, as finishing them off would be his initial goal. He then turned to the rest of the congregation, saying that they in turn would have to make a choice. Or they will show Lee Sung-hak's will the respect it deserves and agree to his proposal. Or they will sink to the level of brainless scumbags. Here he looked at Tae-hyun, meaning him. However, he said that everything was already written on their faces, since everyone had already made a decision for themselves. When he said this, the girl clenched her fist, which was a sign for her people to hide their weapons. Isu turned to Sung-min, saying that they should also finish up, as they had other things to do. Now he had a different status. He was no longer the CEO, but the chairman of Ilhak, with Tae-san as an ally. On the way, Isu asked if he was okay, to which Sung-min replied, can't you tell, saying that they should have arrived earlier? But Isu just smiled slightly, saying that it turned out great, so everything went quite well. He said he was a little lost, having never been there before, when he suddenly saw a man standing below. His pupils narrowed in surprise because he did not expect to see this person at all, especially under such circumstances. Standing in front of him was none other than Chief Zhang, who upon seeing him, greeted him as Baek Do-gyun. He said that they had not seen each other for a long time, and now they finally met again. His face expressed pure innocence. But Yisu's face showed the opposite emotions, because in front of him stood the killer of his small detachment. Zhang stood at the bottom of the stairs and started to walk up towards them, saying that he didn't expect to see Taesun here. Yisu quietly called him Chief Zhang, but Seung-min heard and asked again if it was really Chief Zhang. After all, he knew that he was responsible for the collapse of synchronization. Moreover, he was behind the One Sync project. This man was responsible for everything that happened to him and Ilhak, and he was also one of the bosses. Sun Min wanted to shout at Yisu to let him know about it, but he only managed to say his last name, since it was impossible to say his real name. Moreover, he realized that he already knew everything perfectly well, because a knife flashed in his hand, with which he began to go down to meet the boss. Yisu knew that they were 2.1 meters apart, and it would only take him a couple of seconds to finish him off. After all, back then, the boss treated them in exactly the same way for his own purposes. He didn't care about other people's lives. Then for some reason, he did not hesitate, killing all the members of the squad, from which only Shurionu miraculously managed to escape. This was also the case with Baek Yisu, whom he created, the same as his boss. He should have done the same. He came close to the chief, who was protected by the light reflected from the glasses, so that Yisu could not see his eyes. But Zhang could clearly see his eyes, which were filled with unmistakable hatred and contempt for him. Do-gyung put his hand in his pocket, taking out cigarettes, and thought that now there could be no doubts. He took one of the cigarettes out with his mouth, wondering what would be the best way to start a conversation with the man standing in front of him. He asked the boss if he had a light, and he also took a lighter out of his jacket pocket. Isu leaned towards him, indicating that he should light his cigarette, and Yang reached towards him with the lighter. From the outside, it looked a little funny, because the head of the NAR was lighting a cigarette for the boss of a criminal organization. Zhang was the first to speak, saying that he had heard that there had been quite a commotion after his brother's funeral. Yisu agreed, saying that perhaps that was the case, and the boss asked if the problem had already been resolved. Yisu did not answer right away, saying that he was sure he knew who was to blame for everything, but he had not yet found any evidence. He took the cigarette out of his mouth and took the knife, saying that he could no longer say for sure, seeing the boss there. Zhang asked what he was going to do, and Yisu replied that he could kill him right then and there. But then he put the cigarette back in his mouth, saying that, alas, it wouldn't solve the problem, and so it was pointless for now. Hearing this, the boss tensed up, and he could see how his face distorted a little from these words. Then Yisu decided not to delay him any longer, since he was going to Seung-min, so he continued down. He said that he would keep an eye on the chief, and when their paths crossed again, he would be able to answer his question. That was the last thing he said. He continued down the stairs without looking back, and Zhang looked at him suspiciously. He thought to himself that he would keep an eye on him too. After their meeting today, he had a lot of questions about his little brother. He wasn't entirely sure, but for a moment he thought there was something familiar about his behavior. Isu noticed this too, but he just waved his hand to deflect suspicion, because Do-gyung would have done the same. Seung-min, Young-ho, and Jin-woong also came down the stairs. It turns out the boss didn't come to see Ilhak. He remained standing at the top, still thinking about what had just happened, Baek Do-kyung's words making him uneasy. And Su also thought about his feelings, of course. He wrote hatred, but killing him now would be stupid. When everyone came down, Seung-min wanted to discuss what he had just seen, but Yi-su said that they would move on. Sun-min understood that the boss was somehow connected to him, but he only repeated that they simply had to go. In the morning, the Hyungu Business Contributions Company was already in full swing, calculating the revenue for the recent period. The company's president, Lee Hyun-gu, slammed his hand on the table, saying that there was still 46,001 missing. The man he was scolding said something about some lady from the fruit store, but Hyun-gu told him not to talk nonsense. But the man continued anyway, telling how his creepy daughter told him to take something and come back tomorrow. He said he got an apple in return, and it was pretty sweet, but Hyun-gu told him to keep quiet. He was depressed. He thought about how he had ended up in such a life, remembering that it was all because of that guy sent by Tasan, and also that handsome blonde guy who then relayed the words of his captain, who advised him to retire. He brushed off these memories, saying that he would definitely take revenge on them if he saw them, when suddenly he heard a familiar voice. Shion entered the room and greeted him, saying that it had been a long time since they last met. The man Hyungu was talking to asked who the brat was, but Hyungu became visibly nervous at the sight of Shion. Not hearing an answer, the man approached the boy, asking what he was doing there, but Hyungu told him not to be so rude. He was a little late with his advice. The man called Shion small, and he couldn't stand it and attacked him. A moment later, they were already sitting at the table. Shion told Hyungu to tell him about Garang. For example, about the location of their business centers. But Hyungu asked if he himself didn't know, came here and caused a fuss. Shihi reached for his coffee, saying that he thought he knew. But that was not the case. He was looking for something, but could not find it. Hearing this, Hyungu became interested, asking what he was looking for, but Shion only looked at him with disbelief. Then he thought for a bit and still said that he was looking for people, or rather, a place where 5 people could be kept. Hyungu was surprised to think that these weren't rumors. Gorang really did attack Ilhak and steal the knives. He also heard that the committee was dissolved and Decent joined forces with Ilhak, so it was true. His thoughts were interrupted by Shion, asking if he knew anything useful or not, and he agreed that he did know something. He rose from his chair, saying that initially 2 places came to mind where hostages could be held. He approached the map and showed these points, saying that he had visited them at one time while giving bribes to gain a stronger foothold in Garang. He said that he was well informed about the locations and the number of guards, but he would tell everything on one condition. Shion told him to spit out whatever he wanted, and he asked them to take him with them to Daesan, striking a funny pose. Shion then asked if he wasn't a member of Garang, to which he replied that changing his activities wouldn't hurt him. In fact, he thought that Daesan would win, and in that case, he wouldn't be left out either, Shion agreed. He stood up and said that they were leaving right now, but Hyungu didn't understand if he had been called too, so he asked him about it. Shion looked at him, asking in response if it was he who wanted to join Daesan, since in that case they should go together. These words greatly surprised Hyungu because he had never been invited to participate in something like this, and he stood there in bewilderment. The place was quiet and deserted. There really wasn't a soul here because not everyone knew this location. Hyunam sat on a chair in the middle of the spacious room, his hands tied behind his back. There were traces of blood visible under his feet, and he was sitting with his head down when someone entered the room. It was Ryu Tai-hyun who asked if it was okay for him to be there. He came closer to the man. But Hyun-nim remained silent, and Tae-hyun told him to at least answer something, because it's not fun when you come across such obstinate prisoners. He said that maybe it was because they shared it with their friends, to which Hyun-im responded by telling him to shut up. But Tae-hyun said mockingly that he actually came here to tell a funny little story. He continued by saying that Daesang was now reporting to Ilhak, and it seemed they were planning to make Seung-min the new chairman. And that's why they're looking for them everywhere right now, he said. There's no doubt about that. In general, he congratulated him. Sun-min became president, which means they raised him well. Hyunim raised his head, saying that then Gorang would have to fight against the combined forces of Daesan and Ilhak. He asked Tae-hyun if he had come to complain about how scared he was, as it was just like him, but he told him not to talk nonsense. He said they were Garang, so what could Taesan and a bunch of crippled knives do to them? Continuing to praise his organization, he said that if it had been Choi Jung-ho or the Steadfast Yaksha, things might have been different. However, they had real professionals on their side who, unlike amateurs, always do their job well. But Hyun-nim just laughed at his words, saying that although he didn't know who his pro was, he was sure of one thing. Taesan had Baek Do-kyung, who was no match even for knives since they had already fought once. Right now, he was just entering another battle, destroying another of Garang's subsidiary organizations. He told the boys who were looking at him with fear that he had overdone it a little, but he would be careful in the future. He placed his finger on the blade as Sue had taught him, saying that in that case, it was time to begin. It was the Nine Knives rescue operation, and from that moment on it began. He loosened his tie and walked forward. Meanwhile, a young girl who had an appointment there arrived at the main office of Tai-san. Su-ah entered the hall where Jin-woong greeted her and took care of her luggage, greeting Madam Secretary. Sue said that she tried her best to figure everything out on the way here. The knives should be in one of the 2 buildings. Jin-woong noticed that she worked tirelessly, but the girl replied that she was only doing the job entrusted to her. Jin Wong then asked if there had been any progress, and the girl paused for a moment to answer. She stood in front of the door where they were already waiting for her, but she turned to Jin Woon, reminding him of something. He himself had said that without Baek Do-kyung, there would be no Taesun, and now she completely agreed with him. That's why she, as his assistant, simply did her job, and Jin Woon should have followed her example. She entered the room apologizing for the long wait, and then offered to give a brief briefing. She brought up two buildings on the screen, one a motel in Itaewon, and the other an abandoned warehouse in Incheon. This was the data that Cheyenne collected. She said that knives were definitely being held in one of these points. But since they could not boast of numerical superiority, they had to storm only one of the locations. Plus, it was worth leaving a few people to protect their headquarters, since it was under threat of attack. And Sue began to think. He said that the population density in Itaewon was low, so it was likely that the enemy would quickly discover them. Sue shared his thoughts, saying that, given the above, it was more logical to attack the warehouse rather than the motel. And Sue continued, saying that they would not send their troops there, because if Gorang figured them out, he would involve his groups. In this case, they will find themselves in a disadvantageous position, and the future chairman thought the same thing. Then Yisu stood up and said that in that case, they themselves should go there and free the hostages. To begin with, they would transfer the guys to an abandoned warehouse, who were masters of stealth entry. It won't be difficult for them to get there without attracting Gorang's attention. And as for the other location, and Sue went there personally, it was a small motel where they could potentially also keep people. The man at the reception asked if he wanted to rent a room, but Yi Soo replied that he was actually looking for someone. Then the man stopped him, saying that he could not share information about the guests with just anyone. And Sue reached into his pocket, and the man thought that he was about to be offered a bribe and extended his hand contentedly. However, instead of money, he received a knife, which Yi Soo stabbed into his hand so hard that the man did not even immediately feel that he was wounded. At that very moment, Yi Soo leaned against the glass that covered the window of the booth where the shocked man was sitting. He ducked his head in pain, and Yi Soo leaned towards him, asking if he would now tell about his visitors. But the man remained silent, so he clarified his question, asking if the men from the 9 Knives were here. However, after thinking for a moment, he said that he might not answer, and with these words, he took the knife out of the poor fellow's hand. Armed guys entered the motel and headed towards him, and he said that he would ask them about it himself. A fight ensued, but it didn't last long, and soon one after another the guys fell at his feet. Such an opponent was no match for them. Yisu noticed that these people were Chief Jong's subordinates, which meant he had come to the right place by choosing this location. He asked, even though they hadn't fully recovered from the previous battle, if they really wanted to come with him. He asked Chung Ho this question when he was getting ready for his mission. The old man agreed, and now he fought alongside him. He even joked about his injuries, saying that he was okay now, and that it was Do Kyung who shouldn't overexert himself. But Yisu responded in kind, saying that he didn't want their new chairman to get angry if he got hurt. They were walking up the stairs when Young Ho asked if there was something he could ask the principal. It was unexpected for Yisu. He even told him about it, but he agreed to listen to him and perhaps answer. Then Young Ho asked what was bothering him so much. He asked why Daesung chose Lee Sung-min as its chairman. At first, Yisu wanted to avoid the question by saying that he just wanted to maintain Ilhak's traditions. But Young Ho said that he didn't need cheap show-offs. The government has become increasingly involved in their affairs. The committee has been dissolved, and they are on the brink of a new war. This whole mess had been brewing for just 3 months. But then Yisu interrupted him, asking what he was getting at. Young Ho looked at him and said that he just thought that he, director Baek Do-kyung, had something to do with these events. And so he, Young Ho, wanted to know what his true intentions were, if he hadn't intended anything bad. Yisu turned away from him and looked down, asking if he really wanted to know that. Young Ho responded positively, saying that they had agreed to fight together, and that was why he was even here. But Yisu didn't have time to answer him, because at that very second more of Chief Zhang's men were rushing towards them from above. One of them took out a knife and pointed it at Yisu, but he told him not to yell, because this was where adults were talking. He added that if the guy had something to say, then he should go down himself, but if not, he would help him with it. After these words, he grabbed him by the leg and pulled him to the side so that the guy fell, because there was a fence there. However, another guy appeared behind him, also with a knife, who attacked Yisu and Young Ho with screams. With a calm movement, Yisu grabbed his hand, dodging the attack, He suggested that Jung-ho postpone their conversation. In agreement, the big guy from Ilhak punched the guy Yi-Su was holding in the face with all his might so that they launched a joint attack. This time he was without gloves, but this did not affect the force of his blow, and the opponent fell, never rising again. It happened on the stairs, and Yi-Su was already fighting in the air. It was inconvenient to move forward like that, so it was worth hurrying. Jung-ho thought that the opponents were attacking from above, and that those attacking from higher positions had an advantage. But he couldn't tell that from the faces of these guys, because in this case the situation was exactly the opposite. As if to confirm his thoughts, Yisu grabbed one of them by the sleeve again, intending to throw him as far away as possible. After all, even though they attacked from above, their actions became much easier to calculate. And Su was already finishing them off. Defeating them one after another, his strength seemed to last for a long time. Jung-ho also helped him, from time to time grabbing someone by the arm or leg and throwing them aside. He even managed to grab one of them by the head, and the poor guy was in for some serious pain. It was quite easy to lose balance on such a ladder, so he pushed him against it with all his strength. And Su saw this. He liked the way Ilhak's second knife fought, and he said that they were a great team. While he was still speaking, another man attacked him, but he managed to duck in time, preparing to attack back. He didn't even have to make any special effort, because the ladder did everything for him, and the man fell. He hit his head hard on the steps, but he could still get up to fight, so Yi-Su took care of that too. He demonstratively picked up the knife as if it were a pen and held it towards the frightened man who did not want to die. However, unfortunately, he was in the service of Chief Jung, which meant he chose his own fate. Yi-Su swung and hit him. The guys who remained alive looked at him with caution, and he asked if this was really the end. He added that he was disappointed because he had expected more from the boss. But since that was the case, there was no point in staying there any longer. He said he heard that Garang was recruiting real pros, and they all lost to a worthless gangster like him. So it looks like he was the professional here, as was his partner, Jung-ho, who was also already climbing up to him. Meanwhile, at the abandoned warehouse in Yongsan, the guys decided that they needed to search everything first. Their crew consisted of Xian, Kyung-chun, and Pirate, as Xian had managed to nickname him. Laska, as always, had a cookie in his mouth. He asked who this old man was, to which he replied that he was not that old yet. He told Xian that he had indicated 2 possible locations, but now for some reason he was sure that the knives were hidden here. He added that this is where Garang keeps his prisoners, and he himself saw several new faces heading toward the motel. He finally said that he heard that one of them had a gun, and this made Shiona tense up a little. For the umpteenth time, the man received a harsh rebuff from 2 members of Desun, who were still fighting on the stairs. But Jung-ho wasn't really thinking about the fight anymore. He was thinking about director Baek Do-kyung, seeing how he was fighting. He suddenly remembered Hyun Nim's words, who had said back then that he was just a monster and they weren't even close to him. Of course, he didn't really take his words seriously back then, because the knives weren't in the best shape, which is why they lost. He knew that Director Tyson was strong, but as it turned out, he had no idea how strong. Looking at the crowd of opponents, the boys soon realized that they were up against strong opponents, and some of them decided to run away. But suddenly one of them was hit in the direction he was running, and this took everyone by surprise. The guy who struck was Lee Gyu-chang, Ilhak's 9th knife, who somehow ended up here, even though he was covered in blood. Seeing one of them, as well as Boss Tyson, he said that he himself tried to escape, but the other knives were in danger. It was clear that he was having a hard time too, but the guy didn't pay attention to his appearance, telling them to follow him. Chung-ho, hearing about the danger to his comrades, was about to run after him, but Isu stopped him with a gesture. He also told Mr. Gyu-chan to wait, but he replied that they were right here and needed to hurry. Gyu-chan ran into one of the rooms in the corridor. Isu carefully stepped after him, but something told him not to go in there. He asked him what it all meant, but in response he only heard the click that is usually heard when a gun is released from safety. Quickly realizing that they had been ambushed, Yisu began to think about his next move, while Gyu Chang aimed for the passage. And Su couldn't think of a better option than to arm himself with a knife, because he believed that the enemy would not brazenly shoot them. For now, Gyu Chan was simply holding his gun at the ready, recalling his recent conversation. Then he was asked if he had ever had the chance to shoot, as it was quite a useful skill. He replied that he had tried it a couple of times in the army, but he did not yet know whether he could trust this man. In front of him sat Director Zhang, who said that this time everything was a little different than in the army. But Gu-chan, taking the gun, said that he didn't think there was much difference after all. It was just a gun. Then Zhang told him to cock the gun, and he obeyed, performing the usual actions. Then the chief told him to aim, and he pointed the gun at him, saying that all he had to do was tug. He said he wanted to ask something. If he betrayed Ilhak, would they really spare his comrades? To which Chief Zhang replied that they had not killed them, and that while everyone was alive, he continued to smoke a cigarette. He told Gu-chan to imagine that he was doing this for the good, and overall, that was indeed the case. Gu-chan asked why he was giving him such a chance then, but the boss replied that he had misunderstood. It was not a chance. He looked at him with disdain and said that he was sitting on their necks, a worthless knife and a burden to Ilhak. He said that Ilhak was just a bunch of losers who were abusing their hospitality. Gu-chan couldn't stand it. He gritted his teeth, asking if he really was offering such a thing to them. The 9 knives. He said that the chief should not expect them to go over to the side of the wolves. By wolves he meant Gorang, and Zhang didn't understand it right away. But then he simply smiled. He said that everything was not quite like that. There was no need to take sides. He just wanted to buy them. He continued by saying that Gu-chan had said that the knives were the foundation of Ilhak, but that meant something else as well. Lee Seung-hak and Lee Seung-min weren't worthy of being called leaders, so the wolves wouldn't have to do anything. All the work will be done by them, the 9 knives, or rather, here he looked at Gu-chan. It will be he who will do everything. Finally, Zhang explained the mission, saying that it was simply a matter of shooting one person. It was necessary to do this at the closest possible distance and aim as accurately as possible. He grabbed Gu-chan's gun and pointed it straight at his chest, saying that it was easy, wasn't it? Gu-chan then asked if they weren't on Gorang's side, to which Zhang replied that they were more like tamers than allies. That's why they needed him, Gu-chan, because it was necessary to keep them in check. Lest they think that the world belongs to them alone. These were his last words then. Yishu took out a knife and was about to turn in the direction where Gu-chan was hiding, but something stopped him. Someone's hand fell on his shoulder. It was Chung-ho, who had also already begun to suspect something was wrong. He looked at the director, making it clear that it was better not to go in there, because it really was a trap. Then Gu-chan apologized to Baek Do-kyung, saying that he had no choice, and Jung-ho decided to take care of his comrade himself. He stood forward, leaning against the wall, asking him to explain what was going on. But Gu-chan said that he did it for them, and when Jung-ho came out from behind the wall a little, he shouted at him not to come closer. He cried out desperately that it was for their own good, so they had to admit it. Then Jung-ho asked him what he meant, and he replied that he had spoken with Chief Zhang. He said that he promised to transfer part of the rights to them, the knives, but he didn't have time to finish. Chung-ho interrupted him. He told him to come to his senses, asking if he really thought they would be in charge now. But Gu-chan didn't listen to him. He asked if he was wrong, because why then did the young master become Ilhak's boss? He brought them nothing but trouble, so after the death of the chairman, it was Chung-ho who was supposed to inherit the organization. After all, he did a lot for her prosperity, but Chung-ho interrupted him, slamming his fist on the wall. He gritted his teeth and quietly asked if this was really the only reason he had betrayed Ilhak. Suddenly, he hit his head on the wall, which wasn't made of plasterboard, but he didn't care. A thin stream of blood flowed from his forehead, but he continued to stand there out of despair and disappointment. Gu-chan wanted to say something in his defense, but Jung-ho stopped him, saying that he was no longer his family. He banged his fist against the wall again and said that in that case, he would destroy him in the name of Ilhak. As he said this, his voice trembled and tears rolled down his eyes. It was a difficult decision for him. However, Gu-chan shouted at him not to come any closer, and if he took another step, he would have to shoot. But Jung-ho suddenly said something completely unexpected, saying that he shouldn't be addressed like that. Let him tell his friend this better. And at that moment, Yisu flew into the window that was behind Gu-chan. He smashed the glass, sending shards of glass raining down into the corridor as Gu-chan turned to shoot his opponent. But he didn't manage to do this because Yisu grabbed his hand while he was still in flight, preventing him from aiming the gun at himself. The next second, a knife appeared in his hand, which he slashed across Gu-chan's hand with one sharp movement. He dropped the pistol in surprise and winced from the pain that pierced his arm because the attack was not weak. After that, Yisu kicked him in the legs and he lost his balance and fell to the floor, still unable to attack back. He hit his head painfully on the floor, but that, of course, wasn't all. Then Yisu pounced on him. He grabbed him by the throat with his strong grip, so that he could no longer make any attack. Holding him in that position, his wild look suddenly appeared again, and he asked the man, was he also a traitor? This reminded him of Chief Zhang, so he prepared a knife. He was about to stab him, but at that moment, Young Ho ran up to him, asking him to wait. Isu listened to his words and put away the knife. But Gyu Chan was still a traitor, so something had to be done. And S couldn't think of anything better than to just kill him for this, and he told Chong Ho about it. Meanwhile, the rest of the knives were in an abandoned warehouse in Yongsan, and he was one of them. Lee Sun Mong sat on a chair with his hands tied behind his back, just like Hyun Nim and the others. It was clear that he had been badly beaten, and besides, he was very hungry, so he raised his head when he heard a noise at the door. Someone slightly opened the unlocked huge doors, and a small ray of light from the moon seeped into the room. It was Kyung Chun, but he apologized, saying that he didn't have food, but he could do something else. He entered the room and began to approach the man, and the man asked who he was, because the guy was not one of their people. Instead of answering, Laska broke open the cookie he had saved for when they were leaving the main office of Taesan. He handed him half, asking if it was enough for him, and wanted to throw the other half into his mouth. Of course, he kept more for himself, but Sunmon was worried about something else. He asked where the guy had come from, not to mention how he managed to get past security, since he knew for sure that they had guards assigned to him. Then Kyung Chun wanted to tell the man that he was from North Korea, but stopped himself in time because it was dangerous. Instead, he replied that he was from Taisan, and Sun Mong looked at him in surprise, asking again about Taisan. Laska began to cut the ropes, and Sun Mon said that apparently Taisan made his move, which meant that Seung Min had not let them down. He asked how things were with the others, to which Kyung Chun replied that they had already sent people for them too. At the same time, Shuon finished guarding another bunker where one of the knives could be kept. He looked for the right place, thinking that it must definitely be somewhere here, and soon he actually found it. Another of the knives was tied to a chair in the same way, and also well beaten before this, which was visible on his face. It was Zhang Tukpei's 8th knife, and Xion asked how long he had to wait, but he didn't answer. Then Xion leaned towards him, asking if the man remembered him, since they had once fought against each other. However, he remained silent, and the guy thought that he was still unconscious, so he lightly touched his head. He heard that the man was conscious and even muttered something, but it turned out to be a trap. The next moment, he suddenly threw his head back and attacked Xion with a scream, which the latter clearly did not expect. It turned out that he wasn't even tied up, but was hiding a knife in his hand behind his back, which he swung at the guy. At the last moment, Xion managed to duck, and this surprised the man, because he did not expect this. Then Xion took a closer look at him, and realized with horror that this was not at all the man with whom he had fought back then. He said that his physique was different last time, and the other asked how he was able to dodge his attack. Suddenly, the man pulled his face, removing his mask, and said that even Baek Yi-soo couldn't dodge this attack. In front of him stood Ghost, a hired killer and a professional in his field, who was fighting Do-kyung. Xuan looked at him with surprise because he mentioned that he killed his commander, and suddenly everything became clear. The ghost began to spin his karambit, asking if Xian didn't know the whole story of the battle. However, the guy didn't need to know anything. He had already guessed everything himself and attacked his opponent with a knife. He remembered how Jin Wong's face had changed dramatically back then in the alley. He must have been informed of Do-kyung's death. And the one who killed him was this man, who also thought that he had killed the real Baek Yi-soo and was clearly proud of it. He repeated these words again, saying that he had killed the NAR commander, Baek Yi-soo, and it seemed like he was not quite right in the head. Meanwhile, there were still bunkers left in the abandoned warehouse that their team hadn't had time to check. One of them was approached by Hyun-gu, nicknamed Pirate. He now worked for Taesan, which meant he had to help. He knew this was his chance to show his best side, so he had no room for error. He had to show that he was worth something after Garang had written him off. The guard was already waiting for him. It was the former leader of Garang John Mensok. He said that this was the private property of their organization, so the guy should get lost. But Hyun-gu ignored his words, telling him to get out of the way himself, and this answer surprised the man. The pirate shouted that he was Lee Hyun-gu, the hook of Hanam Dong, and pounced on Mansok, who tensed up a little. Then he too put out his fist, preparing to repel his attack, but he still didn't know what awaited him. It was immediately clear that Hyun-gu had no chance of winning, So he came up with another way and showed his Garang badge. In this way, he showed that he was also a member of the organization, so Mansok had to let him through. He entered the bunker and saw one of the knives tied to a chair in the center of the room, like his comrades. It was Doko Hunam, Ilhak's fourth knife, who was still alive, though blood was visible from his head. The pirate introduced himself, saying that he was Hook from Hyungu's shares, and added that he had come to help. He said that it was Tai-san who sent him to get the man out of here, and he looked at him with disbelief. Meanwhile, in another bunker, where Cheyenne came to rescue another knife, a battle was currently raging between two experienced fighters. The ghost waved his karambits, to which a fishing line was attached, asking where such an adversary came from. He also asked how he knew Yisu, since he didn't look like a bandit, but Shion was in no hurry to answer him. His gaze suddenly became serious. He put on his hood and covered his nose. And then the ghost thought that he was one of the same pros as himself. He wanted to make another guess, but Shion interrupted him, telling him to watch his language. He made a quick lunge towards the enemy, and the ghost barely managed to dodge. The guy attacked incredibly quickly. The man noticed that he was aiming at the neck. He didn't hesitate at all, which meant he was trained in professional knife use. Besides, he hit quickly and accurately, and he didn't often have to fight opponents like that. However, he was no slouch either, as he was a professional hired killer. He ducked from the guy's next attack. Then he told him not to yawn and pounced on him, although Shion didn't seem to be worried at all. Suddenly, he took out a throwing knife and threw it at the ghost's face. He noticed it in time, but it was difficult to react. He leaned to the side, but the knife grazed him, cutting his cheek, and he thought that Yisu was nowhere near this guy. To avoid falling, he put out his hand and transferred his weight to it, then prepared for a counterattack. He rushed at Shiona. This fight promised to be interesting, because they were both strong and experienced. As the ghost ran, he thought that the guy was smart on top of everything else, because he had deliberately weakened his defenses to let the enemy get closer. He had obviously done this to attack him unnoticed, and now he stood at the ready with another knife clenched between his fingers. Shuan said that the man seemed to be a pro since he managed to dodge, but this only made Ghost laugh. A moment later, his face became serious again, and he told him with eerie confidence not to die like Bayek Yisu. Meanwhile, Yisu himself stood on the sidewalk and lit a cigarette. He realized that the hostages were not being held in his location. He stood next to the car where Jung Ho was sitting with Gyu Chan, whom they had disarmed, and now the two were talking face to face. Chan asked him where the rest of the knives were being held, and he replied that they were all in Garang's abandoned warehouse. Then he said that no one intended to harm them, but still, Yisu and Jung Ho shouldn't have gone there. Jung Ho asked why, but Gyu Chan simply replied that they had guaranteed their safety. He said that times were changing, and now they were unable to defeat Garang. He asked if Jung Ho didn't understand that. In this situation, he simply has to go over to the young master in Tayson and go over to the side of a stronger organization. This is the only way the knives can continue to exist. But before he could finish, Jung Ho hit him. He still couldn't believe that his teammate had betrayed him and his organization out of weakness. Gyu Chan wanted to say something in his defense, but he didn't want to listen to anything else and continued to beat him. The man couldn't even defend himself anymore. The fight with Yi Su had taken all his strength, and he stopped resisting. Jung Ho grabbed him by the collar and said that if he continued to talk nonsense, he would tear him to pieces. However, Gyu Chan did not want to give up his beliefs. He said that Ilhak would not be reborn again. He didn't have time to finish this either. A scream was heard from the car, as if they were screaming in pain. It was Chong Ho who had punched him in the face. But then the man took his hand and asked why he insisted on his own, knowing that the game was not worth the candle. Jung Ho gripped the collar of his shirt with all his strength. It was clear that he was experiencing mixed emotions, but soon he looked at Gyu Chan. He screamed that the reason was that he was wrong, and he swung back to hit him. This time, Gyu Chan was unable to do anything at all, so he didn't even move from his place, but he wasn't hit. Jung Ho hit him near the head, breaking the glass, but it still wasn't manly to beat him in that state, even though he was a traitor. He put his hand on his shoulders and explained why he was wrong when he said he had forgotten the main principle of the knives. They, the knives, fight not for the sake of victory, but always to protect what is truly dear to them. Gyu Chan was touched by the old man's words, but he still didn't understand his position, so he took his hand and asked, how could he protect anything with such weak hands? He touched them with his forehead and tears began to flow. But at that moment, the car doors opened and Baek Yi-soo sat in the driver's seat. interrupting their conversation. He started the car and buckled up, getting ready to go somewhere. And Jung-ho asked in surprise where he was going. Instead of answering, Director Tessin pressed the gas pedal and the car moved off. He directed it along his route. Confused, Chung-ho asked him what happened, but the director only pressed the gas pedal harder. He just spoke to someone and said that everything went to hell, and now they have to go back to the warehouse. Meanwhile, the fight between Shuryon and the ghost was still going on. The guy didn't stop throwing knives. But soon the man got tired of this and asked if he was really going to continue playing the fool, since this was actually a serious fight. Finally, he got close enough to attack, but Shion was good at both throwing and close range. The ghost swung his knife, but even before that, he noticed that the guy was clearly not so simple. He easily dodged each attack. As if to confirm his thoughts, Shion pulled his hand behind his wrist, thus loosening his grip. The man felt it. He felt like he was about to drop his weapon, but he couldn't do anything. It was too late. And then something happened that he never expected. In an instant, the guy was behind him, preparing to attack. He bent his arm at the elbow, but no blow followed. He did it for a different purpose. With a sharp movement, he spun on his foot and snatched the weapon from the ghost's right hand before the ghost could even realize it. He only noticed with surprise how the karambit slipped out of his hand, and he looked at his opponent in horror. He thought the guy was reading his attacks. No, he saw his every step, and now he even managed to get rid of one knife. He copied his every move, while Shion himself asked if anyone was still using fishing line. The ghost realized that this guy even knew about his spare weapon, so he couldn't be caught off guard. He even looked a bit like him, and the thought even flashed through the men's minds that he too was a professional hired killer. However, if that was true, he still couldn't lose to him. So the ghost prepared to attack again. He asked the guy who he was, but instead of answering, Shion rushed towards him. It seemed he had a plan again. He swung again. Ghost ducked, preparing to strike at the face, but realized it was useless. Shihi looked at him and said that he knew his every move, so there was no point in trying to outsmart him. The ghost thought that he knew everything so well that it made him sick. Now he even spun the karambit like him. To his surprise, the boy was very skilled with this type of weapon and even masterfully used fishing line. And then he suddenly stopped twisting the knife and looked at the man as if he was about to finish him off. It almost happened. Ghost didn't notice how the fishing line wrapped around his body, and then Shi-on cut him in the stomach. The man felt blood. Now he was a little scared, because the guy was clearly a professional and perhaps even stronger than him. But fear quickly turned to joy. It was not the first time he had fought with such an opponent, so he knew that he would not lose. Despite his wound, he began to attack Shiona even more vigorously, but so far he was still unsuccessful. Then Shion decided to end this fight and, waiting for the right moment, swung his karambit at the man's face. But to his surprise, he didn't even think of turning away from the attack. Instead, he stopped the knife with his bare hands. Blood sprayed out from his hand, but the attack was stopped. Shion didn't expect this, so the enemy had a chance. The ghost took advantage of this and extended his free hand with the karambit towards Shion's hand, intending to cut off his finger. Even though the guy noticed this, it was still difficult to take his hand away. His opponent's behavior puzzled him. Now in front of him was not just a professional killer, but a mad maniac who only laughed at his wounds. He strained his face so much that the scar on his face began to bleed, but he didn't care. He demanded more. Meanwhile, Sunmon and Hyunim had already teamed up and were now breaking into other bunkers together in search of their comrades. Sunmon said that they should be careful if they wanted to do everything quietly, when suddenly he saw a familiar body. They opened another bunker and killed the guards. This time they were lucky, and they saw Guan Pal here. Hyunim ran up to him and grabbed him by the shoulders. He told the man to come to his senses, but he still didn't react. They became worried when they saw the man bow his head as if he was unconscious. Hyungnim shouted at Guan Pal not to joke, as he couldn't just die here, but he still remained silent. For a moment they were overcome with fear for their comrade, but a moment later they were already standing in bewilderment, because it turned out that he was simply sleeping. Hyunnim asked with displeasure what the point of secrecy was then, but Sunmon suggested simply waking him up. Then Hyunnim gave him a light slap, and Guangpal sleepily opened his eyes. The men sighed with relief. They said that now all that was left was to find Tok Pei, when suddenly Hook with a man on his back and Weasel entered the bunker. Hyungu said that they had a problem because their comrade was not breathing properly, and it turned out to be Tok Pei. Blood was flowing from his temple, It was clear that it had been used to remove a sample of a human mask. While the men were helping Hyung-gu take it down, Kyung-chun said that he had contacted the boss and that they needed to get out of there quickly. He was still speaking when suddenly the darkness of the night was dispelled by the bright light of headlights that were directed straight at them. Kyung-chun closed his eyes and couldn't quite understand what it was. But soon it became clear to all of them what situation they were in. A man came out to meet them, saying that he thought they would get in here, but he didn't expect it to be so fast. Taehyun said that they had snuck in like a bunch of insolent rats, and now he had to get rid of this trash on his territory. He already had a knuckle duster in his hand, and behind him stood members of Garang, who were just waiting for his signal to rush into battle. Meanwhile, Shion realized that now he would have to fight at full strength, because one mistake and he would be dead. He remembered how 5 years ago he had taken part in an operation to storm a building, when he had already mastered the art of knives. The security was quite weak, so he dealt with the whole squad single-handedly, but something happened. He fought just like he was now with the ghost, but those people weren't on his level, so he didn't think about it then. Another guard attacked him with a knife, and Shion had karambits at the time, and he was spinning them just like the ghost. He then grabbed the man's arm and twisted it so that he could not carry out an attack, and then ran the blade along his arm. This made the guard's vision blur, and he dropped the knife, and Shion prepared to finish him off. He swung and looked at his victim with a wild gaze. Only his eyes and the earrings sparkling on his ears were visible. He hit the man in the throat, and blood poured out, but he remained alive for some time. He covered the wound with his hand and sank to the ground, his eyes filled with silent horror and fear of the boy. But Shiona was not dissuaded. He swung his knife again and finished off the man, whose blood spattered his clothes. This was the last guard on the floor, so now he was able to enter the door he needed, looking for one person. He looked inside and heard laughter, and then someone said that they shouldn't have done that to his people. The man said they could just talk. He was sitting in a spacious office, more like a library. His name was Yang Jongpal, nicknamed Two Hands, and he was wanted for espionage in both North and South Korea. He was a smuggler of military goods and a broker for deserters from North Korea, and now his hand concealed a revolver. He asked who sent Shion, saying that he could offer him a deal, and then took out his weapon. He aimed at his head when suddenly something thin wrapped around his hand, and he didn't even understand what happened. What happened was that Shion threw the line around his hand, and using the karambits, pulled it towards himself, cutting his hand. John Pal grabbed her, the revolver fell to the carpet, and his blood spattered the table. Then he cursed loudly. He told the guy that he was crazy, but Shion replied that it was, in fact, only a warning. He continued, saying that now it was time to move on to the main thing, because as the saying goes, don't open your mouth at someone else's eye. Back then, Lee Shi-hee worked in HID's Special Forces Unit for target elimination, the Ghost Battalion. He left the building with a total of 11 successful kills to his credit, but it appears that list has not expanded. His boss called him, asking what had happened to Two Arms, and Shion replied that he was now one-armed. Then the boss asked if he really let him live, and Shion asked in response if he really had to kill the man. His boss was Chief Zhang, who said that they couldn't leave any traces, so he had to finish off the bandit. But Shion replied that he had been ordered to warn him, not to kill him, and so he did so. Zhang agreed, but said that it was still better for them to be absolutely sure of their safety. He added that he understood Shiona's views, but that was their mission. And wasn't that the kind of behavior expected from a squad leader? After all, even though the top leadership might not know about their detachment, he must realize how important his role is. Finally, the boss told him to finish the job next time, and Shion replied that he understood everything. He was brought back to reality by the voice of the Phantom, who asked if he had also had fun fighting him. Instead of answering, Shion swung his leg, and his opponent managed to catch him off guard once, but nothing more. He knocked the man down, but he managed to cut him in the collarbone area, although the guy did not pay any attention. Now it was the ghost's turn to be surprised by his opponent. He stopped laughing and looked at him seriously. Shi moved with lightning speed. In the blink of an eye, he was already standing over the man, swinging his knife. A second later, a blow followed where the ghost's head had been, and he barely managed to turn over onto his other side. However, the guy didn't even think of stopping there. He used the knife as a support and jumped on the man. Until the very end, he kept the knife on the ground, so the ghost did not understand what he was trying to achieve. But the situation was dangerous. Cheyenne landed at the man's feet and swung his knife. He managed to put up a defense, but the knife still hit him. Then the ghost kicked him. He was already angry because he couldn't seize the initiative in the fight. But despite the strong blow, Cheyenne didn't seem to suffer any damage. He blocked it with ease. Then he grabbed his leg and put two knives to it, and the ghost was seriously scared because he realized what he was going to do. He crossed the knives on his leg, and his gaze suddenly became somewhat distant. Now he was indifferent to everything. That look scared even a rabid killer like him, and the ghost knew he had to avoid the blow. Gathering all his strength, he made a dash and pushed off the guy, but he still managed to leave traces of cuts. Now the man realized that he was dealing with an unusual fighter because another second and he would have lost his leg. It seemed that now their places had changed. He thought he would hunt big game, but in the end he himself became the victim. Jean began to approach him when suddenly he heard a signal about movement in another sector. His comrades were calling him. He sighed with annoyance, saying that they had been discovered, but that this should have been foreseen from the very beginning of the operation. He looked at the man and said that they would end it there for today and continue another time. But this meant defeat for the ghost. He tried to get up, saying that he couldn't just leave. Shion didn't have to answer. His attack spoke for him, causing the man's pants to rip and blood to flow down his leg. Out of helplessness, he could only scream at the guy not to dare leave, but Shion no longer paid attention to him. Meanwhile, Taehyun was getting closer and closer to the bunker, near which stood the wounded knives Kyungchun and Hyungu. Director Garanga said that he expected to see real professionals, and not some pretty little brat. He meant Weasel, and then turned his gaze to Hook, asking what kind of burdock with a pirate's bandage was that. Hearing this, Hyungu shed a few tears, asking if he really didn't know him, but perhaps it was for the best. However, their chances were slim. Cars were blocking their exit, and Taehyun said that they would not escape alive. Laska assessed the situation and prepared for battle, although he understood that they could not hold out for long and needed help. Suddenly, a strange shadow appeared from somewhere. Kyungchun only managed to see its leg, but that was enough. He realized that Shuon had received their signal and had already arrived at the scene to help them, since he was the one who had just intervened in the battle. The fishing line jumped everywhere, wrapping around the guards one after another, and then it reached Taehyun. He didn't even notice how the noose was around his neck, and from behind Cheon prepared to deliver the finishing blow. He told the bandit to stand still, intending to slit his throat, but Taehyun quickly realized it. He ducked his head, preventing the line from closing around his neck, and swung the brass knuckles, but he didn't see the guy. Cheon quickly ducked under his arm and ended up behind him, continuing to tighten the line around the bandit's body. When everything was ready, he pulled her towards himself, and Taehyun felt something metallic pressing on his neck. In this way, Cheon moved the enemy to his back, and then grabbed both knives to which the fishing line was tied. With a sharp movement, he pulled them towards himself, and Taehyun found himself in a noose, holding on to his neck, lying on the guy's back. Cheon remained frozen in a squat, but as soon as he straightened up abruptly, Taehyun risked saying goodbye to his life. He also understood his situation well, so he tried to somehow get out, swinging his free elbow. But Cheon removed his hand, saying that today Garong's boss was just unlucky, and he should think that he got hit by a hot hand. He then hit him below the knee, and Taehyun lost his footing and fell to his knees. At the same time, Cheon straightened up and put the knife to his still-wrapped neck. Taehyun began to choke. He looked rather pathetic now, and Cheon told the rest of the Garong members that it was better for them not to move. He added that otherwise, he might accidentally kill their boss, and they realized that the guy was serious. Then Cheon turned to his comrades standing near the bunker, telling them to take the wounded man first. Hook wondered how this crazy guy had gotten rid of Ru Taehyun so easily. He asked himself where Tyson had dug up such a guy. However, in situations like this, people often say things like this, so it's always worth being prepared for the unexpected. Cheon ordered the people of Garang to get out of the way, or he would gut their boss like a pig. But at that moment, he heard the whistle of a knife. Someone had crept up behind him unnoticed and was now quickly attacking. Fortunately, he managed to notice the enemy in time. Chief Jiang swung the knife right at his throat, and Cheon barely managed to duck, and the knife cut the fishing line from Taehyun's neck. Jiang told him that he talked too much. As for a poser, his appearance was an unpleasant surprise. The line that was holding Taehyun was cut, and now Cheon couldn't control the bandit. Moreover, hatred boiled up in him at the sight of his boss, because he personally ordered the execution of him and his friends. He didn't think much about the attack and stabbed him, but Zhang dodged, saying it was predictable. To his surprise, the boss also had incredible speed. He quickly went behind his back and stabbed him with a knife. Xion sank to the ground in searing pain, as the boss knew him too well. He apologized ironically, saying that the guy had a wound there, so he had deliberately aimed for his back. He said that he was glad to see him again, and since he was alive, many things became clear, in particular the situation with his commander. He stabbed the karambit into his wrist, asking if the boss of Tyson was really Becky Sue, who had not died. Xion cried out in pain, and the knives wanted to come to his aid, but Zhang told him to stand still if they did not want their friend to die. He added that the situation had changed slightly, and if they didn't want it to get worse, they should stand and watch the show. Meanwhile, Taehyun also came to his senses. He held his hand to his neck, cursing the experienced guy who was able to do this to him. The boss told Xion that he had already told him that such things were not done casually and that unfinished business should not be left unfinished. Then Taehyun intervened, asking what kind of nonsense he was talking about, since the guy had just almost killed him. He kicked Xion and he rolled back, and then he rushed after him, intending to hit him with his brass knuckles. Unfortunately, the blow still succeeded, as Xion was too weak and shocked to block. Taehyun grabbed him by the jacket, asking what he could do now, calling him a stupid show-off. The boss didn't really like this behavior, especially since he interrupted him with a question about the real leader of Taesan. But Taehyun didn't care. He continued to beat Xion, who blocked some of the blows with the last of his strength. Then Taehyun swung to finish him off with one precise attack to the head, saying that luck was not on his side now. He brought his hand down on his head, but Xion only pulled it away and grabbed his hand, preparing to counter-attack. In one jerk, he rolled over onto his stomach, using Taehyun's arm as support, and then grabbed his shoulder. This way, he managed to get on top of his opponent again. He pulled one of his arms to the side and pressed his face to the ground with his elbow. This was necessary in order to knock down the enemy's confidence, and then he took him into a choke. He squeezed his neck again, and Taehyun's vision even went blurry, and he began to convulsively grab the air with his hands. Then Xion loosened his grip a little, but put the karambit to his cheek, asking if he still hadn't learned his lesson. With these words, he drew a knife across his eye, and blood began to flow out, and Taehyun screamed in horror. Xion just smiled, saying that the boss was right because they really put on a good performance. He turned to his boss, telling him to get out of here quickly. Otherwise, he would actually kill Boss Garang this time. Everyone thought that this would be the end of the showdown, when suddenly Chief Zhang said that he could kill Taehyun if he wanted. He said that they had no need of such a useless ally anyway, and then he called the others. However, the men from Garang did not move from their place. They hesitated, but still no one carried out his order. Then Xion pointed this out quite a bit, saying that it seemed like the chief didn't understand bandits very well. After all, the world of bandits is in many ways different from the world of soldiers. Different rules and laws apply here. For example, the fact that he cannot become a boss through force alone, because each of them believes in his boss. And if the boss was going to play with the bandits, then he shouldn't leave any unfinished business, because the rules on this side of the border are different. This offended Zhang, and he asked if he really considered logic based on emotions to be rules. At that moment, he thought that even if Taehyun died here, they would all lose control of Garang. Then he realized that a bunch of thugs would not follow his orders and turned to Xion. He told him to leave Taehyun and get lost because he would only play by his rules this once. And then he turned to Taehyun himself, calling him president, and saying that they would talk about everything later. His face was so gloomy that no one dared to argue. There was something frightening about this man. Then Xion told the others to leave, and he would let Taehyun go when they were safe. Chief Zhang stepped aside. Knives, Weasel, and Hungu left through the bunkers from the back entrance, and no one followed them yet. Xion and Taehyun also began to slowly retreat back, or rather, it was Xion who led Taehyun back. He grimaced with displeasure, and the guy said that next time he would take his eye for real. He then held the bloody karambit to his throat, telling him to try not to die before then. Taehyun couldn't stand this. He waved his hand, thinking that this time he would definitely be able to hit the guy. However, his hand only struck the air, and he was surprised to notice that Xion had already managed to disappear. Then he was overcome with anger and hatred towards Tayson, because this guy was her member, which irritated him even more. He called them all worthless, disgusting insects who, however, managed to make him afraid. He was indignant, saying that he would put an end to this organization of fools, but suddenly Zhang turned to him. The boss had followed them and was now standing behind Tae-hyun, saying that they needed to clarify something. Seeing him, Tae-hyun's eyes flashed angrily. He said what he felt. Now was the time for an explanation. He held out his hand with a brass knuckle, and Chief Zhang pointed a knife at him instead of answering. Meanwhile, a car was already waiting for the wounded knives and others, in which Yi-soo and Young-ho with Gyu-chan arrived. Upon seeing his comrades, the old man ran out of the car, asking what had happened to them during this time. Coming closer, he noticed that Guanpao was still limping, and Takbei was completely unable to walk on his own. He hurried to take it from Hyungu's back, and Hyun-nim noticed that his condition continued to worsen. He said that they needed to hurry to the hospital, otherwise everything could end badly. Isu quickly assessed the situation. Among the wounded, besides knives, there was also Shion, but he said that everything was fine with him. They were already on their way. Luckily, the hospital was located near the abandoned Gorong warehouse, so they would make it in time. In the backseat of the car were the unconscious Takbei and Gyu-chan, who suddenly quietly apologized to his friend. He said he didn't think things would turn out like this, but suddenly Takbei opened his eyes, asking what he was apologizing for. Gyu-chan replied that he was short-sighted, and that was why Takbei and the other knives suffered, but he interrupted his friend. He leaned back in his seat and said that he should ask forgiveness from the young master, not from them. But Gyu-chan couldn't do that. With tears in his eyes, he asked how he could show himself to Shungmin. Then Takbei looked away and said that if the young master did not forgive him, then he would kneel down with him, and together they will ask for his forgiveness. With these words, tears also began to roll down his face. He said that they should go to him right now. But that was the last thing he said, after which the man fell silent, and given his condition, Gyu-chan became worried. He was touched by his friend's devotion, but he understood that Ilak had suffered because of him, and it was only his fault. He could no longer hold back his tears, and they flowed like a river onto his hands. He thought that he would not be able to bear it if Takbei died. However, time was running out as they drove, and he needed to come up with a plan quickly, and he realized what he had to do. He agreed with his friend, saying that they should indeed go to the young master and ask for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Chief Zhang brought a lighter to light a cigarette and turned to President Garang. Apparently, they had been fighting before, but for some reason, Tae-hyun ended up on the ground, and Zhang was towering over him with a cigarette. He said that the bandit's fists weren't that bad. You could even say he had some talent. However, Tae-hyun didn't feel the praise in his words. The boss grabbed him by the hair and lifted him up slightly. At the main office of Tai-san, a difficult task was now ahead for Gyu-chan, who had come to ask for forgiveness. All the knives were gathered there, as well as Yi-soo and Shungmin, who had not said anything yet, listening to his confession. Yi-soo sat in his chair and simply watched what was happening, wondering how the director would react to the betrayal. But Guanpao didn't hold back. He hit him in the face, saying that he was a real piece of shit, because so many people died because of him. He continued to beat him, asking how he even had the nerve to show his vile face here. It would be better if he just left. He swung to hit again, but this time his hand was stopped by Young-ho, saying that it was enough. But he pushed his hand away, saying that he had to deal with this bastard, because he had betrayed them in Ilhak. Then Young-ho said that only the boss had the right to judge him, but Guangpao said that there was no need for him to get his hands dirty. He added that he would deal with such a fool himself, but Yi-soo saw that Shungmin still hadn't reacted. Then he stood up and went to Shungmin, saying that Tai-san would not influence his decision in any way in this situation. In the end, it doesn't concern them at all, even though Gyu-chan caused them all a lot of trouble. He came close to the chairman and took out a knife, saying that betrayal was a very serious matter. And his decision remains with him, the director of Ilhak. With these words, he handed him the knife, and Shungmin accepted it. Then he headed for the exit, saying that the other knife should also cool down, and Guanpao realized that this concerned him. Then Yi-soo continued, explaining that this problem could not be solved by simply punching the traitor in the face. He placed his hand on Guanpao's shoulder, who was about to start beating him again, but now hesitated. And Su told him that there was no point in making a show out of it, because that way nothing would change, and that was not what they needed. Guanpao thought for a moment, but still decided to listen to Director Tyson's words because he was right. Sonmin held the knife and also thought about what Yi-soo had told him. Now he had to judge a member of Gudo for treason. He suddenly said that the reason for Lee Gyu-chan's betrayal was his own incompetence. He then added that, in this regard, he forgives him, and Jung-ho looked at him in surprise. Then Seung-min added that he was accepting Yu-chan back into their ranks, but the man refused to believe it. For a moment there was silence in the room. Everyone thought that the conflict had been resolved, but this turned out to be far from the case. Sun-min's voice suddenly changed and said that this was how he would have answered before, but now everything was different. He said that his betrayal resulted in the death of Tak Bai, who ultimately could not be saved, so his guilt was obvious. And so he will not judge him like a foolish young master, but will pass sentence on him in the name of Ilhak. He gripped the knife tighter and walked towards Gu-chan, who was kneeling, unable to rise after Guanpao's blows. But at the same time, he understood everything perfectly well. He knew that he deserved it, and that's why he didn't think of resisting. He prepared himself for the worst because the director had every right to stab him or even kill him, but he only passed by. Gu-chan looked at him in surprise. He didn't know if it was generosity or if the boss was about to tell him to get out of Ilhak. He could not bear the silence and shouted why the young master had spared his life, since he had betrayed them. Because of him, Tokbei was killed, but Seung-min replied that it was now clear to him in what direction their organization would develop. He said that he would do it, he simply had to rebuild Ilhak, but the men still didn't understand anything. Sun-min continued, looking at the knife. He said that it was not designed to cut the throats of such pigs. So let Lee Gu-chan get out and never show up in their sight again. That was his verdict. He said that he was no longer the knife of Ilhak, and there was no point in shedding his blood on the path they had chosen. He walked out of the room and the others followed him, all except Gu-chan, who remained standing silently. Sun-min thought what a pathetic leader he was, even though his words said otherwise. Jung-ho asked if he was the only one who showed them Chairman Lee Seung-min's Ilhak, since that was something new. Min's son was surprised by his words. He turned around and asked what he meant by Ilhak, since such an organization essentially no longer existed. But Jung-H didn't agree with him. He said that from now on, every word or action he said would reflect Ilhak's will. After all, there is nothing wrong with the young gentleman wanting to remake the organization to suit his own needs. Meanwhile, Yisu went up to the roof where the helipad was and waited for the performance to end. He wasn't entirely sure what Seung-min would do, but he doubted that he would kill Gu-chan, because it was a difficult decision. He put the cigarette in his mouth and reached for his lighter, but discovered that there was none, when suddenly someone handed it to him. It was Sue-A. She was wearing a beautiful white suit, but her face looked tired. And Sue thanked her, saying that he could never remember where he put his lighter, and asked if the girl smoked too. But she silently stepped aside and replied that this lighter belonged to Mr. Baek Do-kyung. Hearing about his brother, Yi-soo said that it had been a long time since he had been called by his real name, and he leaned on the fence. People called him Baek Do-kyung so often that he had gotten used to it, even though it was just a lie. He shared that he constantly catches himself thinking about this, because in order to take revenge, he must behave like his brother. Then he asked, as if asking himself how his brother would act in his place, what he would say now, and everything else. I wonder what he wouldn't like if he saw Yi-soo with a cigarette in his hand, since he was a soldier and didn't usually smoke. Sue-A smiled awkwardly, also remembering her director, saying that he would indeed be displeased. However, she later added that for some reason, she was also sure of something else that Do-kyung would say about him, his brother. She quoted him as saying that the only thing they had in common was their terrible temperament. At least that's what he definitely said, and Yi-soo agreed, saying that it was just like him. Sue-A opened her eyes in surprise, looking at him, because she didn't think that she would remind him of anything like this. But Yi-soo continued, saying that this is exactly what Baek Do-kyung would say, and he looked at the girl with gratitude. This look reminded her of the director. Now it even seemed to her that Do-kyung was really standing in front of her. However, their conversation was interrupted by Seung-min's voice, who asked if Director Baek was there, and then walked towards them. In one hand, he held a knife, as Yi-soo noticed, without blood, which meant that he still solved the problem in a different way. Chung-ho stood up with him, and they walked towards him together, and Yi-soo asked if he found this little thing useful. Then Seung-min turned the knife towards himself, saying that the blade was indeed quite sharp, but it couldn't be used to cut pigs. With these words, he handed it over to Yi-soo, and he, upon hearing this answer, said that he thought they had settled everything themselves. He then hid the knife in his inside jacket pocket, saying that they should now get down to business, but was interrupted by Chung-ho. He apologized for interrupting, but before moving on to discussing plans, he would like to have his question answered. Isu looked at him with confusion. He thought the man meant something related to the chairman, but then he remembered their conversation on the stairs, where he had asked him what his true motives were. Then he didn't have time to answer, because they were attacked again, but now he should give him an answer. He leaned against the railing, saying that before he answered, he asked Jung-ho to clarify something. He asked if Ilhak controlled the entire criminal underworld of Seoul, to which Jung-ho replied that he once did. Then Yisu asked if he remembered how much money the organization was making every single day back then. Jung-ho said it was 15 years ago, so he doesn't remember, but Yisu said it was a lot of money. Jung-ho asked what he meant by that, and Yisu explained that it wasn't just bandits who wanted to occupy the highest point in Seoul. It was a pretty advantageous position, but Jung-ho still didn't understand what he was getting at, so he told him this. Yisu then explained that the government was trying to reorganize the system to distribute rights among criminal groups. It was this very thing that set off a whole series of events that involved Chief Zhang. This unified synchronization project was called OneSync, and it was what was mentioned in the document that Jung-ho gave him. The man then thought that the information they received from Police Chief Cho Won-ho was correct. Isu turned to Seung-min, saying that it must have been difficult to keep it a secret from the knives, since only he knew about it. But Jung-ho said that he still didn't understand, because Director Daesan never told him about his true goal. However, he replied that there was nothing grandiose about it. He just wanted to set something up for himself. After all, a scumbag like him won't fight for justice and go out of his way for a good cause. To be honest, he didn't care who was in charge, but he couldn't let Chief Zhang do whatever he wanted. In other words, solving this problem meant a lot to him, because it was not just a goal. In this way, he was going to avenge his brother, who was also part of this gangster system. Jung-ho asked if it was really that important for him to stop Chief Zhang, and he agreed.